This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
The time is approaching 10 o'clock. You are, of course, listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I guess the scale of the results is the perfect starting point for a conversation about what the other lot did wrong, because this is clearly as much about losing as it is about winning. And it's tricky. It's trickier than perhaps it seems. If you say, as we did yesterday, for example, that this is largely about an offer to improve individual lives. So Donald Trump comes along and says, I will make your petrol cost less. I will improve your life. And you are perfectly reasonably concerned about little else. That's how you cast your vote. But is it that simple?
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 10 is the time. Can I take a moment just to mark the passing of John Knott? I know I opened yesterday's show with a bit of a riddle. What were the three words that we opened with yesterday? Mateless, Marks and Dixville. Careful, Keith. I've got a riddle well, it's not a riddle this morning, but do you know why John Knott, the former Defence Secretary who has just passed away, very much a bastion of a form of conservatism that younger listeners have never experienced in their lives. Do you know why he is strangely relevant to the political landscape in America? It only just occurred to me, so, I always find myself worrying when these thoughts pop into my head before the news, just as the news bulletin comes to an end, that I'm about to embarrass myself live on air. I think that's probably why you tune in, isn't it? In the hope that I do. But John Knott is part of the story of Rupert Murdoch's corruption of the body politic on both sides of the Atlantic. It was in 1981 that Rupert Murdoch met with Margaret Thatcher at Chequers. They had a Sunday lunch together at Chequers. She was trailing in the polls. The country was in a recession. And she really needed a cheerleader. The British media back in 1981 was very different from what the British media is like today. The British media today is a place where you can listen to people wearing poppies claiming that we should respect the system that delivers an overtly fascistic leader to the top of the political tree in America. The poppy, of course, is probably the most powerful symbol that British people have of the promise never to allow history to repeat itself, never to allow European attitudes to events in 1930s Germany to be repeated. Sadly, they are, looking at much of the British media today, being repeated in British attitudes to the political landscape in America. But John Knott went to Chequers and wanted help in expanding his empire. His empire was quite small at the time. He had the Sun, which was nothing like the monster it would become, but he needed the Times and he needed the Sunday Times in order to really buy respectability and consolidate his position. And Margaret Thatcher came back from Chequers. They denied that this meeting had ever taken place at all for 30 years. Do you know how it came out that this meeting had actually taken place? I think it was at Leveson. It was at one of the public inquiries where I think Bernard Ingham, Thatcher's former press secretary, was giving evidence. Ingham, a man who went to his grave, still accusing Liverpool fans of having caused the Hillsborough tragedy. And he was asked whether it had taken place. Well, Margaret Thatcher anyway, someone claimed they couldn't. No, it was Murdoch. It was Murdoch at Leveson. The humblest day of my life. It was Murdoch at Leveson saying he had no idea whether he had no memory of. So they denied that the meeting had taken place for 30 years. Murdoch claimed throughout that period that he'd had no memory of it. And then because of the clock that allows things to be released, the number of years pass, and then official documents can be put into the public space. The QC that was interrogating Murdoch at, I think, Leveson, one of the public inquiries, said, well, this might jog your memory. Here is the thank you letter that you sent to Margaret Thatcher after that meeting at Chequers in 1981 that you have denied ever since. So Thatcher then comes back from Chequers, mindful that her business secretary, John Knott, was a notoriously tough cookie. He was a man for whom the letter of the law and the detail of the law was was paramount. It's the 30-year rule. There you go. It's not a coincidence, is it? 31 years of denying it. And then, of course, as a consequence of the 30-year rule, the document gets released. So John Nott was business secretary, which means John Nott would have the final say on whether or not Rupert Murdoch was allowed to buy the Times and the Sunday Times after Murdoch had put together a claim, fiercely disputed by the then editor of the Sunday Times, a claim that because they were hemorrhaging money, then the normal rules of monopoly and mergers shouldn't apply. In other words, the rules in place to stop any individual from becoming too powerful in the panoply of the UK media should not apply to Rupert Murdoch's attempt to buy the Times and the Sunday Times because they were losing money. Harry Evans, who was the editor of the Sunday Times at the time, was adamant and provided evidence to suggest that the Sunday Times was not losing money at all. So Thatcher comes back from that meeting and calls John Nott to Downing Street. John Nott, an ally, a widely respected business secretary. And when John Nott left Downing Street, he was not business secretary anymore. He was defence secretary, which is why in Thomas's bulletin there, it reminded us that John Nott was defence secretary during the Falklands conflict. Twice he offered his resignation. Again, evidence of a form of integrity, a calibre of conservative politician that we haven't seen in this country now for generations. John Nott was an example. Flawed, imperfect. I get loads of messages now telling me all sorts of things about him that will make your hair fall out. But that is how politicians used to behave. Lord Carrington's resignation was accepted, I think, in the immediate aftermath of the invasion. So John Nott leaves Downing Street and he's not business secretary anymore. He is defence secretary. And he was replaced by, and this is where I was hoping that my brain would kick in, John Biffin. There you go. It did kick in. Crikey, it happened. He was replaced by John Biffin, widely regarded as a much softer touch. And lo and behold, John Biffin waved through Rupert Murdoch's rationale for being able to sidestep monopolies and mergers laws and buy the Times and the Sunday Times. So we mark the passing of John Nott by remembering Rupert Murdoch's visit to Chequers, denied for 30 years, revealed by documentation released as a consequence of the 30-year rule. We note that the swapping out of John Nott, the late John Nott, for John Biffin enabled Rupert Murdoch to essentially sidestep rules put in place to stop any one individual assuming too much power over the body politic in the United Kingdom. And we reflect that over the course of the next 50 years, give or take, he would undertake a very similar project in America, albeit one that involved him having to take out American citizenship and exercise precisely the sort of influence over the body politic in America that our monopoly and mergers laws in this country were once, before he blew them up, like he has blown up so much, were once designed to prevent. So it is possible, I would say probable, that little vignette of British politics explains, and historians of the future will attest to be, the part of the process by which Donald Trump could become president of America twice. Because without Fox News, Donald Trump would have been nothing the first time around. And then, of course, even after Fox News lost $800 million for promoting his lies about the election that he lost, that slow creep back to support for him is part of how he did it this time. So there it is. I know that's a little bit weird. That's how my brain works. I love that kind of, what would you call it? Almost the cryptology of politics. But it is amazing how many stories lead back to the same space, lead back to the same spot. The corruption of the body politic by people like Rupert Murdoch, the legacy of Margaret Thatcher, the mainstreaming of, at best, dishonesty, at worst, blatant lies. And here we are today. But obviously that's not what we're talking about on the programme. We're talking about Kidderminster Harriers and their astonishing victory at Curzon Ashton last night. What did the Democrats get wrong? What did the Democrats do wrong? Here's a thought. If you were looking at your ballot paper in America earlier this week and you were genuinely, and I don't think it's fair to typify these people as selfish or as self-obsessed or as greedy. We talked yesterday about the ability to either freeze out, ignore, or even perhaps not know about the extent of Donald Trump's personal depravity and the descriptions of Donald Trump from his, Byzantine's the word I was looking for, Jamie, these Byzantine details of political history. We talked about that yesterday and focused instead on the question of what people did vote for. And it's pretty obvious, isn't it? People voted in America for the man they thought would improve their life. And most obviously, he would improve their life by making their dollar go further in shops, in car dealerships, in grocery stores, and also by deporting illegal immigrants who they believe, rightly or wrongly, are a drain upon their dollar. That part of the reason why their dollar does not go as far as they want is because of all the illegal immigrants. Rightly or wrongly, doesn't actually matter for the purposes of this conversation. So that was the offer, right? That is what you are contemplating as you stand in the ballot box. And that, of course, makes it irrelevant whether you're Hispanic or whether you're a WASP, whether you have Scottish heritage, German heritage, or Mexican heritage, particularly if you're second or third generation. And because, again, rightly or wrongly, because the American dream teaches a form of equality that's very different from what we hold dear in this country. The American dream, it tells you, I am as American as people who came over on the Mayflower. So to cast a vote, despite what many of us would see as negatives, is not as shocking as it should be. I am voting for improvements to my life. All right? That is what I am voting for. And Donald Trump has promised me improvements to my life. He has promised me that inflation will come down. He has promised me that he will get rid of all these people I believe are a drain, not on the economy as such, as a big macro entity, but as a drain upon my personal, too much of my money, where if it's going on taxes, is going on things that it shouldn't be going on. Donald Trump has promised to make me better off, to make me financially healthier. That's the promise. What was Kamala Harris's promise? So it's kind of a trick question, that. What was Kamala Harris's promise? You stood in that ballot box. You licked your pencil. You prepared to put your cross in the box. What was the promise you were hoping she would keep? This is a thought that came into my head, and we may play the clip again, when we were listening to that former Bush advisor talking about risk, talking about how a lot of these people would never countenance putting Donald Trump in charge of their child's school. But that's all about stakes, isn't it? It's all about what's at stake. If you're putting someone in charge of your child's school with a history of personal depravity that would make Genghis Khan blush, then you're risking something very personal. You put him in charge of the whole country, what's the worst that can happen? All right, he's going to deport some people. He's not going to deport me. He's going to deploy the army to break up protests about Palestine. But I'm not on any protests about Palestine. Why should I care about that? So what have I got to lose by voting for the man who's going to improve my life? And what did Kamala Harris promise those people? Listen, I followed it quite closely, perhaps not as closely as I could have done, but I don't think she promised them anything. Which makes the scale of the victory a heck of a lot easier to understand. So that is your starter for 10, or your starter at 10. You may think it's an unfair question, but you know how this program works. All opinions welcome. Come one, come all. What did they do wrong? What did Kamala Harris, and perhaps more pertinently, the Democrat machine, the Democrat Party, how did they mess it up so badly? How did they get everything so wrong? And listen, we'll take the big stuff, which might be the broad, great historical sweep of post-war America, and we'll take the little stuff, which might be, I don't know, why did she keep bringing out some of the richest people in the country to tell some of the poorest people in the country why they should vote for her? It might have been, I don't want to put too many ideas in your head, but remember, your job is to explain your suggestions, not just to provide them. It might be that the smug presumption that I'm not Donald Trump, that'll be enough to get me over the line. But they should have learned in 2016 that wasn't enough. They should have learned in 2020 that it was barely enough. So how did the Democrats get it so wrong? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How did they get it so wrong? And from that, perhaps, we can wonder what they might need to do differently if they want to stop this bizarre march backwards on issues that many of us spent much of our lives thinking were missions accomplished, whether you're talking about abortion rights or basic equalities, common decency, rapists being bad, all of the things that you thought were over as conversations are not. So what did they get so wrong? How did they mess it up so completely? If indeed you think they did. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10. Now, I don't think brooking any criticism of the question what went wrong, because to challenge that question, you'd have to claim nothing went wrong or that everything went right. It didn't, did it, from a Democrat point of view? So how did they get it so wrong is a question that I look forward to hearing your answers to. We will begin in Edinburgh. Struan is there. Struan, what do you reckon?
Hi there, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard.
I think you touched on it very briefly, but it sums it up really well. Kamala Harris didn't give herself an identity. I think it's showcased specifically whenever you heard reporters say things like, so people were discontent with Joe Biden's administration in certain aspects. Are you going to be carrying on similar kind of prospects from the Joe Biden administration? And she would respond by saying, well, I'm not Joe Biden. And
yes.
there was a noticeable, well, what else?
Well, who are you? So I'm not Joe Biden and I'm not Donald Trump. But there needs to be a third point on that triangle when you tell people who you actually are.
Exactly. And I think she really missed a trick by essentially not standing strong in certain opinions on policies that people are drastically concerned about. For instance, the gas prices and everything, I think Donald Trump, well, it's more because she's disadvantaged by being associated with the previous administration. And as you say, when you go around conservative voters, a lot of them say, oh, Donald Trump's he doesn't take rubbish and everything like that, and we're sick of gas prices being low. And frankly, whether she likes it or not, she's associated with the administration where gas prices are where they are right now. So she needs to say explicitly, clearly, why she's not Joe Biden and what she's got planned so that she can bring gas prices down.
So what's the offer? What is the offer you are making me? And is what voters say, and she didn't really answer that question. And no. I mean, I don't know whether or not that part of this is the problem of, you can talk about how internationally inflation in America is actually a success story. The growth, the economic growth, we'd kill for. Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak would kill for the economic growth that Joe Biden has presided over. But that doesn't matter if you feel that your grocery bill is much higher than it was 5 years ago, and it was lower under Trump.
Exactly. And frankly, these people that are complaining about gas prices being low, they're not looking at statistics for economic
Stop saying
growth
low,
or inflation.
Sorry. I do this as well. Once you get it in your head, you get it the wrong way. They're not complaining about gas prices being low. They're complaining about gas prices being high.
Sorry, yeah.
That's all right. It's easily, there you go. You think my job's easy, don't you? You see, you've got to watch this.
Oh, God, no, I could never do what you do, mate.
But that's it. And that is it. My gas prices are too high. I'll lower them. Okay, I may as well vote for you. And I think that's the point that commentator yesterday was making when he talked about risk. I wouldn't put you in charge of my school, but I'll put you in charge of gas prices. Yeah.
And I think another thing is that the main thing for Kamala, I think, that she stood for very clearly was women's rights, free kind of access to abortion, all that sort of thing. That was the only thing where I saw her actually get really passionate, and she had a genuine cause for speaking. Whereas whenever she talked about other stuff, it became almost like stock phrases and tropes and things that are she's like been
you feel
trained
there
to
was
say,
an
essentially.
authenticity when she was talking about reproductive rights that you didn't see when she was talking about almost anything else. And also,
Exactly.
that was a miscalculation, as it turned out. I mean, you get in the question of what is she offering me? I don't know how many of the white women, because Trump won among white women, that's the only reason I'm breaking it down into that demographic, went into the booth thinking, well, I don't need an abortion and I don't think my daughter will ever need one either, so why should I worry about this? Or, of course, the significant swathe of America that thinks it's a good idea to ban abortion, but it didn't go where a lot of people thought it would go. The Daily Mail writers are brilliant today. There's a phrase I never say because they're so excited and they're so hopped up by this victory, just as they were excited by Adolf Hitler and Oswald Mosley in the 1930s. So that their masks slip temporarily. And one of them writes, Kamala's big mistake was to assume that women were more interested in abortion rights than immigration and the economy. And that, of course, for people who consider women's rights to be one of the greatest triumphs of 20th century politics, is an incredibly hard pill to swallow. Maybe there's a point to this. I don't care enough because it doesn't actually affect me. It's a principle. And that fella over there is going to make eggs cheaper. That's not a throwaway line. J.D. Vance focused on the price of eggs. Indeed, he stood in front of a display of eggs that were on sale for $2.99, claiming that eggs now cost $4 a box. But none of that matters. But can we dig that clip out again? I just thought it was Chris in Brighton that brought it to our attention, wasn't it? The guy that presents the Bullock podcast used to be an advisor to Bush. It's really, really interesting. But the question of what they got wrong, how did the Democrats muff it up so badly, is one that I want you to answer. Struan, a brilliant debut. Nick's in Tottenham. Nick, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome. I haven't done anything yet.
I think this is going to be a very broad brushstroke of an idea, and if you put the corpse of the Democratic campaign on the mortuary slab and cut through the layers, I think right at the core, the issue would be, or the cause is Obama, and let me explain why I say that. Is that there is a direct lineage from Obama's landslide, which really was the last landslide we had. I think it was something like 360 electoral college votes he won in 2008.
Yes.
There's a direct lineage from Obama to Biden, obviously then with Clinton as the Secretary of State, and then obviously to Harris through the president and vice presidents.
Yes, clearly.
And I think that the Democrats have ran on the same message of hope and change that Obama ran on in 2008 and haven't been adaptive enough and able to change that message. And as a result, I think Donald Trump is less of the man that won the election and more of the reaction that the American people did with this rise in populism as a result of not being able to resonate with the Democrats' message, as it hasn't changed over the past 14 years. And
Obama's promise was more abstract. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. And, his record is very impressive, but it's not impressive enough to still be propelling people into the ballot box all these years later.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. He had that mandate for 2 years with the Senate and with the House, and after he lost, I think it was just the House he lost in 2012 at the midterms. It showed that although it was a powerful message to win one election, it is not a message that can last for 20 years.
It doesn't establish a dynasty. It doesn't establish a political dynasty. And of course, yes, the mathematics of American politics, seeing the House work against him for much of his second term, if not all of it, means that if there was a chance of actually establishing some sort of political dynasty, the Republicans scuppered it anyway. There's a great piece. Andrew Marr's producer, Matthew, has just sent me a brilliant piece in Democracy, the journal Democracy, called The Death of Deliverism. And it lists Biden's successes in economic policy. Most obviously, it opens with the biggest drop in childhood poverty since records began. But it doesn't matter anymore. And the Democrats haven't caught up to this new world yet. I don't know. Does it? I hope it doesn't mean they need to start speaking the language of benign demagoguery. They have to sort of greet the vicious demagoguery of Trump with a sort of touchy-feely demagoguery themselves. But I don't. How do you deal with an electorate that doesn't care about what has been delivered because they either don't believe it, don't think it affects them directly, or they think that the benefit today will be clawed back tomorrow in taxes? And Trump rises above all of that by campaigning in slogans.
Yeah, I think the slogan point's spot on. I think I've actually made a note to reread a fantastic book, Fire and Fury, from I think it was Michael Wolff that wrote it in 2018.
Yeah,
and
it's Michael Wolff.
It's the most interesting book where you learn that actually, as Donald Trump is not a man with opinions. Everything that he's ran on is the opinions and the policies of the Republican Party and how they've adapted their message to resonate with the voters at the time. When in reality, Donald Trump as a man, he is not that bothered about enacting policy. For him, it is about the brand, about winning the election.
And latterly about staying out of jail as well. I mean, and settling scores and the proving of points. Michael Wolff actually writes in the Mail today as well. I wasn't joking when I said for one day of the year it's actually worth buying, having a look at what happens when these masks slip. If you wondered how a newspaper like the Daily Mail could have been ecstatic in its support of Hitler and Oswald Mosley in the 1930s, you need look no further than how some of their columnists are greeting the second election of Donald Trump. But it couldn't have happened if he'd been up against strong opposition, effective opposition. It may have happened still, but it wouldn't have happened in the style that it has happened. So what else did the Democrats get so wrong?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, do you remember the morning after two big events that possibly got overshadowed partly because of the candidate switch out? But you wouldn't believe the criticism that comes in or that came in when we said after that first debate that Biden had to step down. Biden couldn't go. And they'd spent 2 years, the Democrats, kind of denying that Biden had problems. You can see why, because Trump has obvious problems as well with cognitive decline or with sort of chaotic thinking. But and the double standard. But the double standard is a given. The double standard is a real thing. We mentioned the film Don't Look Up a lot. And in fact, if we get around to the question of what is the worst that could actually happen, I think the environment is going to be very near the top of that list, the fossil fuel pursuit. But the man who directed that film that we love, Don't Look Up, that provides such a helpful analogy of attitudes to climate change, he puts together quite a few answers to the question that we are asking today. Who would have guessed that lying about Biden's cognitive health for 2 years, refusing to do an open convention for a new nominee, I think the latter was a consequence of the former, of course, never mentioning public health care and embracing fracking, embracing the Cheneys and the year-long slaughter of children in Gaza wouldn't be a winning strategy. So I don't know whether or not stronger positions on any of those things would have alienated as many voters as they attracted, but it would at least have provided the answer to the question of what is the offer beyond women's reproductive rights. I don't know. There's one thing that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is actually slightly bigger than perhaps some of the analysis allows. But I'll keep that in reserve in case you don't mention it. 10:36 is the time. Adam is in Swansea. Adam, what would you like to say?
Firstly, I want to agree with what you've just said. I think the tactics of the tactics of Kamala's loss come down to the fact that Biden should have dropped out earlier. They should have given them much more time to have a convention and actually have a discussion around ideas and what they stood for. As a result, I think Kamala was chained to Biden's economic unpopularity, which I do personally think was unwarranted.
Well, how do you unchain from that, given that his economic performance on by any objective measure was actually good? I mean, I know that politicians can campaign in poetry and have to govern in prose, although Trump's probably an exception to that rule. But on inflation and growth, most heads of state would kill, most prime ministers and presidents would kill for his figures.
I think it comes down to largely how liberals and the left in this country and across the pond, I think how we communicate to our own working class and our own middle class. Yes. I think, people vote on the economy, but people listen to politicians.
They don't, though. I'm sorry to jump on you there. They don't vote on the economy. They vote on their personal finances.
Well, okay. Respectfully, they vote on how they feel the economy is doing for them.
Yes,
but they listen to the politicians that speak to them personally on other things. And Trump, as abhorrent as he is, spent his early his political foraging speaking to people on concerns that were not necessarily being addressed by other politicians. Yes. And I think that we do that in this. I think we do that in this country. And on the economy,
well, it's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? If you allow people in, or people make their way into the public space who wang on about nothing other than immigration, and then you can watch. There's been some brilliant research done into this. There's a reason why it dropped off a cliff as an issue of public concern shortly after Brexit in this country. The tail wags the dog. The politicians, the public figures, and crucially the media, who make it an enormous issue. Fulfill the prophecy. It then becomes an enormous issue. It's why we have, I don't know if fun is quite the right word, but it's when you actually ask people to detail and describe the personal impact it has on them. They often and usually can't, but they're absolutely convinced it's a reason why their life isn't going as well as they think it should be.
Yeah, respectfully.
Stop saying respectfully, you're making me nervous.
If I just want to interject, what you've just said there, I think, is a perfect summation of reality that we exist in,
yes.
But it doesn't speak to people's day-to-day lived experiences. I'm from South Wales,
yes,
and a seat near me, Llanelli, was very close to going reform this election. If you look at it, completely blindsided us, and I think it's gone reform it's nearly gone to reform because in the constituency there was a hotel, a very, very popular hotel, which was shut down, and there was a big prolonged fight about whether there were going to be migrants, asylum seekers housed in this hotel.
Well, respectfully, it wouldn't have shut down if it was very, very popular.
Well, actually, that's not true. There were wedding venues cancelled. There were weddings cancelled and things like that. If
it was making money, it would have stayed open.
Yeah, but it was making more money as a migrant hotel.
Because the economics of that are, well, they're certainly questionable, but you're quite right. Enough people believe that it's true to think that that is the thing they should be. But we don't want these people. And of course, it's a hop, skip and a jump from that to trying to set fire to it.
But this conversation right now, how well do you think this goes over with people that have these concerns about these migrants?
Well, you say to them, it's exactly the conversation I was just alluding to. You say to them, how is that affecting you?
Well, if you live in Llanelli,
yes.
You've lost one of the only wedding venues in the town. You've lost a place to go. Which is
a decision taken by the owner.
Yeah.
So why are we blaming the poor sods that are staying in it for that?
Well, that's exactly it. We
I know.
are having this. We're having this. But we are having this conversation, and we're at cross terms.
We're not. We're agreeing on everything. It was a commercial decision taken by a very wealthy person. The only thing we disagree about is how profitable that former hotel was before it became an asylum centre. A lot of the people you're describing will believe that the people who are put up there are enjoying the same levels of hospitality and luxury that they would have done if they were paying guests when it was a proper hotel. But again, respectfully, you and I know that they're not. So how does a Liberal or a Democrat puncture that balloon, which is almost all nonsense, with, as ever, with far-right rhetoric, that little kernel of truth at the heart of it?
I think, and this might be controversial, as a Liberal left, we have to have honest and ugly conversations. I think we have to be able to go in and have these conversations and recognise where people's concerns are met.
I think this is a good analysis of Harris. And I think that just sort of staying very quiet about it all, or presuming that third generation Hispanics were going to be comfortable with illegal immigration because they share more genes than perhaps WASPs do, was incredibly naive, incredibly foolish. But I speak as one of the few people in the British media that has these conversations all the time. And people don't like having their balloons burst, Adam. So that the challenge for what you describe as lefty liberals is to find a way of making the truth more palatable to the masses than the lies.
I think we need to find a way to be able to have comfortable conversations about identity politics on issues
but who with? Who do you have the conversation with if it is a liar?
In my part of the world, it's the white working class, because we are a very white area.
Yeah, well, there it is. And they're the areas that think immigration is having the most deleterious impact on their lives. So how do you deal with that absolute anomaly?
So we've just had this conversation where we've had all of the facts. We've all agreed with each other, and yet our voters here are still listening to reform. They are not listening to us, so we need to realise, well, what are we doing that? And I think there are lots of ways. The Liberal left is very happy and very quick to play identity politics for marginalised groups. All right, by and large, I think that is a fantastic thing. I think.
Well, it doesn't win many votes, though, does it? It certainly doesn't win the votes that you're talking about, because you walk into the voting booth, and I guess your own economic situation is the crucial constituent of the complacency you might feel in that space. And, oh, look, there's a candidate that's offering to make life better for people that aren't me.
Yeah.
That's the problem you're describing.
Yeah, but to take an example, I mean, I think we speak very academically about issues on race and things like that, and I think that can be very alienating to lots of white working class people.
But again,
who are
you say
basically left behind
academically.
by the economic model.
Yeah, I know, but that you've just proved why it's almost impossible to have the conversation. You use the word academically as a synonym for evidence.
Well, I mean, let's take a very, very sensitive topic that exists in this country.
Go on.
I believe was it? I think it was in the news this morning. Another grooming gang in Halifax.
Yes, I haven't seen that, but they're on trial, are they? They're in court.
I think they've all been sentenced.
Okay.
I think that's where we are. But I won't speak to the specifics of that. You, as a white liberal, try and have a conversation about the existence of grooming gangs in this country.
No, but again,
it's very difficult.
No, I know you think it is, but I've been doing it since 2010. But what I won't do, here's the problem, Adam. And what I won't do is use it as evidence that all Muslims are bad, or that all immigrants are bad, or that there is something unique to a brown-skinned man or somebody with Pakistani grandparents when it comes to grooming gangs. And the people that you are, the problem that everybody has is the conversation being dictated. I've been having these conversations, I'll say it again because it's important, since 2010, when Andrew Norfolk in the Times first started reporting on it. And yet the people who insist that we don't talk about it enough are always the people who want to use it as evidence that all Muslims are bad. And they are the people who end up, of course, setting fire to asylum hotels. So you can't, I mean, the Times, it's a paper of record. These conversations are constant. Your man, not your man, but what's his chops, the one who's changed his name again, this time to prisoner 6434642. He ended up in jail last time for jeopardising the trial of a grooming gang, and yet is a hero of the people that think we don't talk about it enough.
No, I completely agree.
So how do you have this conversation in a way that doesn't give oxygen to the liars?
Well, I think in lots of liberal circles that I exist in,
yes,
I think that people would be very reticent to even acknowledge that it is a problem. I think it's 80%.
I don't know what circles you are white, but I don't know what circles you're mixing in. People are reluctant to have elements of the conversation you describe because of the people who are determined to use it as a. I mean, look who talks about it endlessly. People who want the population to turn upon ethnic minorities.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that they dominate the conversation. So how do we have it? So, I mean, if you take multiculturalism has been fantastic for this country, absolutely fantastic. But there are so many instances where integration doesn't work. And we have to be big and bad enough to say, this is where it hasn't worked. This is why we pass laws against
it's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game. It's like all good or all bad. And where the Liberal has not just a role, but a profound responsibility to marry the two together, to keep the people claiming it's 100% good and anybody who's got any issues or complaints is wrong or racist, and the people who claim that every time a brown person does something wrong, it's proof that all brown people or all immigrants or all refugees are evil or criminal or all of those things. I don't know. I don't know how you have that conversation. I've been trying to have it for over a decade. How do you think you have it?
I think that we just acknowledge that. I think that we can be in a space and say that, yes, that gang-based grooming is a problem within one certain community.
Well, that's statistically untrue, but I'll let you carry on with the point.
If you read the J report was saying that is it 1,400 victims they'd identified, and the gang-based offending was overwhelmingly from one ethnic background. In the
cases that they looked at, but I'm not uncomfortable with the statistical evidence of cases that have been brought, and if you've got the evidence to back it up, that's fine. But it doesn't prove anything about any of the people from the same background who haven't committed any crimes.
No, it absolutely doesn't.
And the people that I think the people you're suggesting you need to have conversations with believe that it does.
I think this comes back down to infantilizing people and saying that they're wrong for believing what they feel and what they see.
Yeah.
I think if you see loads of people coming into this country via boat every day, I think that's going to rile you, and I think it's very understandable that would rile you. Whether you're an immigrant who's come here legally, whether you're somebody who's lived here all your life, and I feel like when Keir says smash the gangs, well, yeah, he's speaking very practically. We all know that we need to crack down on organised crime. We all need to open up legitimate routes so refugees can get here safely without having to get in a boat. But when we say smash the gangs, well, that doesn't speak to the people who are annoyed that people are coming here, because, I mean, frankly, some of these people, and we have the statistics, are economic migrants. Some of them are refugees and asylum seekers we've abandoned because we pulled up the routes. But we need to be able to say that, look, we need to have a system that works, and we need to recognise that. And we just speak in terms like smash the gangs, and it doesn't address people's concerns, so they don't listen to us. They listen to people who frankly don't have the facts.
What does address their concerns?
I feel like accepting and maybe not being so quick to play identity politics maybe all of the time.
But the concerns are still there. What addresses the concerns, not how they feel about the rhetoric or the words?
Sorry, I don't...
Well, what would a policy look like? You're talking about how the conversation needs to change. What would a policy look like?
Again, I think opening up safe routes. I think third country processing, so that people can come over here. I think speeding up asylum processes. I think all of the bread and butter.
That's what Labour has talked about historically.
Yeah. So the question is, why
that hasn't worked?
Well, we don't know if it's worked yet or not, because we haven't.
Or as a policy proposal, because I think what would work politically is promising to deport them all, which is what Donald Trump has done. And that's why I worry, even though I agree with most of what you've said, I worry about where these conversations lead because of the motivation of the people you'd be having the conversations with. I mean, how many of the people, for example, if we were to make a list of who do you think would be a helpful person to have the conversation with about a more robust and open immigration discussion, and we start making the list of all the people that reach for the talking points you've reached for from the other side, if you like, of the progressive divide, and then ask how do they feel about Donald Trump's promise that he's going to deport everybody and quite possibly use the army to do it, and they'd almost all be on board with it. So that's the Pandora's box that you run the risk of opening up.
I feel like we're way past that, and I feel like we were way past that in 2016. Like, as we've been through it, if you want to vote on the economy, Kamala was obviously the better choice. If you want to vote on immigration, well, Obama was the deporter-in-chief. We have the facts.
So that didn't work either.
But people don't listen to us. And I think it's because...
Speak for yourself, champ.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No, but you're right. I mean, we're not winning any arguments at the moment, except in the very short-term context of UK politics. The fear is that a couple of texters are picking up on, and I don't think you have said this, but the fear is that you're suggesting that we should allow the whole conversational agenda to be set by the scaremongering and the sort of Murdoch-flavoured rabble-rousing.
I don't think that we should let that conversation be set by it, but for years, these conversations have been happening without us. That's why we had Brexit. That's why we've had Trump.
I guess this is where my unique position becomes unhelpful, actually, because I've done nothing but have these conversations for a decade and a half. And I'll tell you something, when you actually use evidence to point out to people that their feelings are unfounded, guess what, Adam? They don't thank you for it. They go away hating you even more.
No, I completely agree. There's a YouTube channel called The Good Liars that has spent the campaign trail basically interviewing Trump supporters, and the cognitive dissonance is unbelievable.
So who do you have the conversations with then?
I mean, it's obviously... I mean, in this country, you've got to think about the electoral coalition.
I'm really late for the break. So if you can, in a sentence, who do you have the conversation with?
I feel like we need to go where people are having the conversations, hit the doorstep, speak to people in social clubs, speak to people in a knitting group. They're having different conversations that sound different to what the Liberal on the show are having.
The reason why your life is not going very well or the reason why some of the things you're unhappy about, the cause of that is not 100% the things you think it is. So we're back essentially to telling people that they're wrong.
I mean, if you're going to vote for Trump in the economy, yeah, I think you are wrong. But you have to. But how do we deconstruct it? But I think that largely comes down to the economic model doesn't work for these people. Yet
and
it's
that's Bernie Sanders.
Like the liberal
I could talk to you. I could talk to you all day, Adam. Promise me you'll ring again, all right? But I have to go to a break now because that's where I decided today wasn't the day to bring Bernie Sanders into the conversation. But the extraordinary negativity that he attracted from some people who you'd think were of a similar outlook, I think is crucial to what Adam is describing. But as I said, that's 8 minutes late for the break. Take that as an enormous compliment, Adam, and I mean it. I could listen to you for a lot longer. It's 10:53.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:56. We're staying with this, so don't worry about the short amount of time left between now and the 11 o'clock news. The question is, what did the Democrats get wrong? And I think inevitably it involves questions about what the, quotes, liberal left, end quotes, potentially still gets wrong in this country, albeit with that, what's it called, loveless landslide, albeit with that big but very shallow majority that Keir Starmer currently enjoys. The problem, and I think I've got some qualifications in this field, I don't get as many calls as I used to get from people convinced that the colour of your skin or your ethnic origins is the most important definer of your character or indeed your geographical origins. But it's the same thing, isn't it? And it has been throughout history. Everybody is more or less the same. And some people can't accept that and some people can. But I think Adam's point about, if he'd agree with me that is the central point you need to be getting across, is not being put across very well, which is why so many of these conversations break down. I mean, not in terms of being victims of racism or having experience of privilege, but in terms of, what humanity is. Humanity isn't changed by attributes, by immutable characteristics. And yet the debate between people who, whether they are prepared to say it out loud or not, honestly believe in a kind of racial hierarchy. And they are usually the people propelling the conversations about immigration. So the idea that you have more conversations with them, or you can somehow bypass them to get to the people on the doorstep or on the street, I don't know. I'm haunted by one element of yesterday's show. I used the word haunted a bit too much. I'm beginning to sound like Ebenezer Scrooge. I am haunted by the ghost of radio past. And it was that thing that Simon and I talked about 2 days ago, about the desirability of a Trump victory in preference to a narrow Harris victory. Just think about that as a recalibration of conditions. The idea that two, I don't want to characterize Simon, but one massive lefty liberal could actually contemplate preferring a Donald Trump victory to a narrow Kamala Harris victory because of what Donald Trump might do in the context of a narrow Kamala Harris victory. I haven't changed my opinion. I'm just slightly terrified about what it means that I ended up holding that opinion, because it means that I have recalibrated, and I'm not even American. I've recalibrated my position according to fear of what a deeply degenerate politician might do. And that leads you to hoping that the deeply degenerate politician wins. It's crazy, right? Lots more room for calls, I promise. And that wasn't my fault. That wasn't me talking. That was at least as much Adam as me. So if you want to get involved on the question of what did they get wrong, a couple of big things missing from where I'm sitting. What did Kamala Harris, or more pertinently, the entire Democrat machine, miss? What did they get wrong? How did it go so badly? 0345 6060 973. And if you're overdosing on politics, whether American or otherwise, don't forget it is Thursday, which means all being well, come 12 noon, oh yes, it'll be Mystery Hour.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. I mean, it's true. That is probably what John Knott is best remembered for. But if you had to pick, and I know I get a bit obsessive about this, if you had to pick a perfect exemplar of how they broke Britain, available in all good bookshops, then John Knott is a really good example. John Knott best known for storming out of an interview, because that's how our media works, right? And it's true. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Thomas's analysis in the news. That is probably what he's best remembered for. I think Ian Dale published his autobiography, and I think they called it Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, because Robin Day subsequently described John Knott as a Here Today, Gone Tomorrow politician. But actually, apart from his stewardship of the Ministry for Defence during the Falklands War, quite a big deal. But actually, being the man who had the cojones to stand up to Rupert Murdoch's attempt to ride roughshod over British traditions, British values and monopolies and mergers requirements, and that being the reason why Margaret Thatcher moved him out of business and into defence and replaced him with John Biffin, who waved through, although he subsequently in his autobiography, I know I need to get out more, he subsequently in his autobiography expressed some misgivings and regret about what he'd done with regard to Rupert Murdoch. That is where a historian would perhaps take the John Knott story as opposed to a headline writer. And of course it's relevant to the conversation we're having now, because without Rupert Murdoch's deliberate dismissal, denigration, denial of basic reality, without Rupert Murdoch's influence on both sides of the Atlantic that could lead inevitably to Kellyanne Conway being able to describe alternative facts as a synonym for lies, you would not have President Trump, either the first time round or the second time round. And these are not opinions. These are just facts. And those of us who very, very naively thought that when Fox News was fined $800 million for amplifying Donald Trump's lies about the last election, that something significant had shifted forever. God, how naive was that? Extraordinary thing. So that those lies were so egregious that the network that disseminated them got fined almost $1 billion. Not fined, it was ordered to pay that in damages, I beg your pardon, to the company that made the voting machines that Donald Trump and his allies lied about. And do you know that during those depositions, Tucker Carlson, who lost his job at Fox as a consequence of this episode, Tucker Carlson saw comments he'd made about Donald Trump shared with the court, and they make me sound like a fan. The way that Tucker Carlson spoke about Donald Trump was extraordinarily critical and insulting. But of course, by the time the next electoral cycle came around, Carlson was a fully paid up cheerleader. And that's why the idea that you need to have a conversation about some of the things that people think, when so much of the things that they think have been put into their heads by people like Tucker Carlson and Rupert Murdoch, it's so tricky to know who you should be talking to. It's one of the reasons why I do the job that I do. Because you are always welcome to ring me, repeat the things that you think are true, and then we'll work through whether they are or not, whether you should actually believe them. Up to and including the idea that your life would be improved if we set fire to a hotel full of asylum seekers or started deporting anybody who you don't like the look of, which is kind of, the second bit at least, one of Donald Trump's electorally successful gambits. All of which feeds into the bigger question that we're asking this hour. How did the Democrats get it so wrong? What did they do so wrong? So lots of big picture stuff. We can do some little picture stuff as well, if you want. I've got one thing that no one's mentioned yet. That I think is a bigger deal than perhaps we allow. And it speaks to the bigger picture. It speaks of a disconnect, a failure to understand. I don't like the phrase, the concerns of ordinary people, because I want to live in a world where the concerns of ordinary people include rape. But that was yesterday's conversation. There's something, I wonder if you can work out what it is. Anyway, Hayley is in Accrington. Hayley, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, Hayley.
Loving the show as ever.
Thank you.
So the thing that I'm thinking about is, given I think you're right, I think it's people's personal finances that they were most concerned about going into voting in the US. And I think the thing that's missing from the Democrat message is that, given that they are traditionally the party of big government, bigger taxes, that they're failing to give a positive and clear message about collective responsibility and the importance of it, and that how we fulfill some of that responsibility through taxation if you pay your taxes, yes, there will be this slightly higher demand on your personal finances, but it will pay for these services, that school over here, these, the various other things that improve the quality of your life overall. Pay, most importantly, for things like Medicare, Obamacare, things like that, which are going to be rolled back under a Trump administration, as far as I understand. Those
What's
things
the
are
logic
hugely
there?
important.
What's the calculation there then? Because I'm a big fan of the he doesn't mean me school of thought, but the things he's going to roll back affect almost everybody, and yet people are casting their vote thinking I'll be okay.
Exactly. Well, that's precisely it. I think he plays into an I'm all right, Jack mentality. As long as I'm okay, as long as I'm not affected, it doesn't matter. I just want less competitive demand on my money, be that through taxes, be that through the number of people in the country, be that through whatever it might be. He plays into I will make your life better just by making things okay for you, and to hell with everyone else.
To hell with everyone else is unkind, but probably accurate. And that's why the belittling of people. I mean, you'd like to say you can fall for this stuff without buying into the to hell with everyone else. But I don't know that you can completely. I don't know that you come out of it with your conscience untouched, because you are enjoying the belittling. He doesn't insult people by accident. The way that he... I mean, it's extraordinary to hear people demanding that David Lammy should apologise to somebody for words that Donald Trump would dismiss as being too polite and kind if he was providing a critique of another human being. Did he call Kamala Harris mentally disabled, didn't he? I mean,
he did.
So, and yet we've got people in this country say, oh no, he's got to apologise. David Lammy's got to apologise to the man that called his own rival mentally disabled. So it's bonkers, but it's part of it.
I'm not sure you should apologise, given, like you say, he was saying those things. He was also talking about, the gleeful anticipation of training a load of guns on his opponent's heads.
Yes, I mean, that I think does qualify as a joke as opposed to an actual call to arms. But in the mind of an observer, who knows how easy it is to make those distinctions. So they didn't. I mean, it's a much different country, as you know. It doesn't have an NHS and it doesn't have a welfare state, which makes me eternally confused about why the messages you've described don't resonate even more than they do here. But Labour on a mission now, to remind people that taxes equals social capital and a better life for them, not just for unemployed people or single mothers, but a better life for everybody.
No, this is it, and there seems to be an absence of cheering the benefits of that kind of approach to governing.
What would it have looked like, Hayley? What do you think it would have looked like? So, what would a Democrat candidate making an offer, a plausible offer, without going completely down the roads of unkeepable promises that Trump is going to go down? What would it have actually looked like?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit lazy on my part, but I can't help but be influenced by what Labour have done in this country. Yeah. But it would have been around precise points. For instance, we will increase the funding for state schools by placing VAT tax on private schools. So really specific things like that, but then always taking it back to the basic idea. In the way that Rachel Reeves did in the budget, it was about repairing the fabric of society. You
mean the budget in which she didn't mention defence at all? I'm glad you got that joke, because as I said it out loud, I thought maybe I had a fair degree of confidence that you would. And that takes us back to a conversation that we had either late last week or earlier this week. The idea that, because if there's a fly in the ointment of your analysis, it's the idea that we are not two countries divided by a common language. I think there's something about America's pioneer spirit. There's something about the American dream that makes the messages you describe more likely to land in the United Kingdom than they would be in the United States.
Yeah, but that said, in the past, there is a left in the US.
Yeah.
And there was a socialism in the US once upon a time. These things aren't they're not alien to the US. It's just that somehow over time, maybe you could say it's kind of come from, Reagan onwards. I don't know. But
Murdoch.
over time, Murdoch, that it's been
squeezed out
completely eroded.
to the point where Bernie Sanders managed to secure extraordinary popular support without ever really enjoying any kind of coverage or credibility from the massive majority of the media, including the media that is maligned by the right as being left, because it, of course, commits the sin of being neither. Hayley, thank you. That was brilliant. Great. I say it I don't say it every day, but I do say it most days. If you didn't get the joke about Rachel Reeves and Defence's role in the budget, I can provide you with the punchline shortly. I shall do so after the next junction. But first, I want to hear from Gracie, who's in Bristol. Gracie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I kind of, going back to the US, I think that the problem with the Democrat Party is kind of twofold, but they're like linked together. So the first one is that they kind of conceded, I think, on a lot of like crazy things that Trump was saying, and they just kind of let him have those like talking points without really fighting back against them. And I think the big one, like for the US anyway, is immigration, because obviously he's saying like, oh, there's so much crime that's being committed by immigrants and there's so many drugs coming over. But if you actually look at like statistics from like the Department of Homeland Security and stuff like that, most of the drugs that come over into the US are brought over by US citizens. Like, it's not illegal immigrants.
This is the corollary of the conversation we were having with Adam. I mean, what do you do with the people who believe the lies that people tell about immigration because they have votes?
Yeah, I think it's just like, because like neither of the two parties are really like combating that sentiment. Like, if you had a party that actually did do that, like they would get coverage. They have to get coverage because it's functionally a two-party system over there. But then I think
so Kamala Harris in debates could have, so on the one extreme you've got Donald Trump saying they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and Kamala Harris, I don't know that saying no they're not actually butters any parsnips. Everyone kind of knows they're not, except the people who know they're not but want to pretend that they believe that they do because it makes them feel bad. I mean, that's the perfect example of people like you and me thinking the facts will help, the facts will demolish the feelings, but Donald Trump understands them better than we do, and he knows he's going to galvanise them by telling them that they're eating the cats and they're eating the dogs.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy from like an outsider perspective.
That's the best example we'll ever come across, is that you're saying, and I agree with you still, that the answer is facts, the answer is evidence, but the bloke that we're talking about is the bloke that told them that Haitians were eating their pets.
Yeah. But I think the other problem is that like Kamala has kind of moved like further onto the right to kind of like try and soak up like Republican supporters who don't want to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But she's like, she's doing kind of like the border policy. She's doing fracking. She's like, oh, I own a gun, like all of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Here's Liz Cheney. Here are some real bête noirs of the traditional liberal America, and they like me. They prefer. That's not necessarily the win that you think it is.
No, because if you look at like the numbers that we have available at the moment, obviously not all of the votes have been counted yet, but it doesn't, like, looking at 2020 and looking at now, like there's not much difference in the people voting for Donald Trump. Like, it's around like 72 million or something when I last looked at it, but Biden got like 81 million votes, and then Kamala was only on like 67 million or something. And I think a big part of that is just losing a lot of like the left votes that you would have got.
People staying at home. It's not going to make enough of a difference to me to go out and vote.
Yeah, because you're not giving them like a left option. You're just giving them two Republican options, and the left isn't going to want to vote for
a lot of the left,
the lesser of two evils.
Yeah,
it's not really enough.
No, a lot of the left said that about the last election in this country. I think wrongly. I think Keir Starmer stands accused of doing some of the tacking to the right that you describe, but certainly fiscally and in terms of where they're putting the pinch on everyone from private school parents through to farmers with estates worth in excess of £3 million in most cases. That is the kind of thing Kamala Harris would have run away from at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's as bad in the UK, but I do think that Labour should look at what's going on in the US and just kind of that if they decide over the next 5 years to kind of court reform, court the Conservatives, like, we're going to have a really big problem.
Well, that's the problem, though. Again, I mean, this is probably what we're going to be talking about for the next 3 or 4 years, because, you know, we've got a media that is obsessing about whether or not David Lammy should apologise to Donald Trump, despite the fact that Donald Trump's own vice president expressed fears that he would turn out to be literally, and I quote, America's Hitler. I'll say that again because I think some people presenting radio programmes may have forgotten. J.D. Vance described Donald Trump as potentially being America's Hitler, but David Lammy should apologise. It's absolutely bonkers. And, of course, Nigel Farage said, I think we'll find that actually Donald Trump was telling the truth when he said that people were eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Because a man whose lies have been counted into the 4 figures, if not the 5, Nigel Farage, of course, still describes as someone who always tells the truth. And these people are a huge part of our public discourse, much bigger than those of us on this side of the divide, simply saying, well, that isn't true and that is true. So if someone popped up here, probably Farage, promising to deport every illegal immigrant in the country, it could have a similar galvanising effect on elements of the electorate who believe the stuff that they've been seeded with since, to go completely meta on you, since John Knott was removed from the Secretary of State for Business job in order to make room for someone that would wave through Rupert Murdoch. And everything that has followed, if not everything, much of what has followed can be traced back to that moment. It's 11:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11, mystery hour on the way. The government in Germany's just collapsed, by the way, lads. I don't know if you're paying attention to that, but the three-party coalition in Germany has buckled under the weight of various issues. We should probably talk about that, I think, at some point. Just a quick hit with a German correspondent, perhaps find out what this might mean, what it does mean, what it will mean. But it is, I think, fair to say that anyone hoping that Keir Starmer's election would herald in a period of instability, I beg your pardon, herald in a period of stability, has had their hopes fairly roundly scotched in the last 48 hours. How big was Gaza? I don't know. I saw a lot of leftist, I don't like that word in the context of the Middle East, actually, a lot of humanitarian opinion on social media suggesting that Kamala Harris's complicity in what a lot of people consider to be a genocide in Gaza was a huge issue. A lot of people failing to vote for her, if not necessarily voting for Trump. Is that electorally significant? Is it a big part of the answer to the question of what did the Democrats get wrong, or why did it go so wrong for the Democrats? I don't know. But Gracie, the last caller in Bristol, right to point out the change in voting numbers, and the people who were minded to come out and vote for Biden rather outnumber the number of people who were minded to come out and vote for Harris. There will be a number of reasons for that, and we're exploring as many of them as we can. And Gaza would definitely be one of them. I think there is another theory here that we haven't touched on yet. And it actually marries it all together. Can we have that clip that we played yesterday? Can we just have a little listen to that? The guy talking about risk. His name is Tim Miller. He was advisor to Bush, one of the Bushes, I forget which one. Jeb, it was Jeb Bush. Jeb, the one that didn't make it to the White House, but it's not that long ago. Everyone thought he was destined to. But he also now presents a rather splendid podcast called The Bullock. And I don't know whether anyone has described this election in America yet as the podcast election, but there's some very, very harsh lessons for traditional media to learn about, largely Donald Trump's success involving swerving completely what you would describe as traditional media encounters and instead doing podcasts, because they are huge. The problem is that the news outlets you rely on to get an idea of what's going on in the world, albeit that they are also largely doing podcasts, they're not quite ready to tell you how big a deal podcasts are. We're lucky because this is both a podcast and a radio show. So once again, we find ourselves straddling this problem in a very graceful fashion. I think we can all agree. So, but but it's certainly in terms of how Trump conducted his media campaign, they prioritised podcasts over much else. But this is not a podcast. This is a normal telly programme with Bill Maher. But this really stuck with me from yesterday's show.
These are the stupidest smart people in the world. And and it's only in the context of politics where somebody as smart as Ben Shapiro would take a risk such as this on Donald Trump, right? In their personal lives, they would never put their kids in a school where somebody like Donald Trump was the principal of the school. They would never do that, right? If there were two options and there was like a normal center-left kind of woke liberal running one school, and there was an insane madman sundowning running the other school, saying random all the time, they would always go in the woke liberal school every time. All these people, they're only doing this in the context of politics. It is an unbelievable risk. And the Wall Street Journal this morning, if you don't mind, I pulled this one up. These are supposed to be the intelligent conservatives. This was their editorial today. Mr. Trump was too undisciplined and his attention span too short to stay on message, much less stage a coup. In supporting Trump, the Wall Street Journal's editorial position is he's too stupid to coup, so we're going to roll with it. That is insane. He's going to be older than Biden. Right. At the end, he's going to be older than Biden. We're going to have this elderly man with only crazy people around him in charge at age 82. Who would take this risk? No matter, even if you did agree with the policies or whatever, it is a ludicrous risk to take, and all of these supposedly smart people have lost their mind to go along with it.
26 minutes after 11 is the time. The Gaza question cuts both ways. I'll tell you why in a minute. But what that focused my mind on, unlike some people, I don't clock off, at 1 o'clock. I keep on thinking. I'm never off duty. I'm always working. And in the context of all the things we've wrestled with about this American election, and obviously this is analysis for people who like thinking. There's an awful lot of fun to be had for people who don't like thinking, although they don't seem very happy about the result. They just seem to be delighted that some people are sad. What are you actually celebrating? The unhappiness of other people, the gallons of liberal tears. Yeah, but what are you celebrating? You lot are cross, but what are you actually celebrating? And I think one of the observations that might knit together a lot of the stuff that has gone on is that issue of immediacy, right? That idea that you go into the ballot box taking that risk that guy just described, Timothy Harris, is it? What's his name? Anyway, he just described it. Tim Miller, forgive me, that Tim Miller just described. And you can make that risk because you don't have much at stake. It's not like you're putting him in charge of your school. You're putting him in charge of your wallet. You're putting him in charge of your purse. You're putting him in charge of your fanny pack. It's just a little nod there to my American followers. And that's why they got rid of him last time. Because COVID suddenly meant that the risks were much, much higher. So your mum could actually die of COVID. You could actually be severely compromised by COVID. You knew that COVID was not something whose negative impacts were going to be confined to the other, right? COVID is a really big problem. And the president is on television talking about injecting bleach or using light to fix it. So Trump's chaos, coupled with a perception of effectiveness, is a constant scale. It's a constant balance. And if you don't think you're going to be negatively affected by the chaos, you're going to take a risk on the effectiveness, which is why you'd let him run your country, but not let him run your child's school. What COVID did was bring the chaos right back up on the scales so that it completely outweighed any effectiveness, not least because he was so ineffective in dealing with COVID. But the chaotic nature of his handling of the crisis meant that suddenly it did matter. Suddenly it was personal. So having a president in charge during COVID is closer to putting him in charge of your child's school than having a president in charge not during the worst of the COVID crisis, because COVID, for the record, has gone nowhere. And that, I think, is absolutely crucial to understanding what's happened. And it helpfully, perhaps, pushes out of the conversation all of the concerns about depravity, because some of this has got to be immune to the depravity. Some of these votes have been cast despite the depravity. And it's a simpler equation than some of the analysis suggests. Why could you go from anti to pro Trump, answer COVID? I don't mind him being in charge when there's not a lethal pandemic sweeping the country. Because, look, he might bring inflation down. He might make petrol cheaper. He might make my wages go further in the grocery store. But if you introduce a crisis like COVID and you watch the president talking about injecting bleach and curing it with light rays, or whatever it was he said, then suddenly it's personal and the risk is not worth taking. And that, I think, explains some of the shift in numbers. It takes us back to Dixville and that big swing. The big swing in Dixville is something that haunts me. It doesn't haunt me at all. I just wanted another excuse to say that phrase out loud. And that idea that people can go from Biden to Trump, which seems weird, unless you marry that analysis there about the principal of your child's high school to my observation about COVID. And then I think, at risk of sounding even more conceited than usual, I think a lot of it begins to make perfect sense. 11:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mystery Hour on the way at 12 as things stand. Also an interest rates decision expected at roughly 12 noon as well. It's very inconvenient that they coincide interest rates announcements with the launch of Mystery Hour, isn't it, every few months. But I think there is set or highly likely to be a change in the interest rates this week. So rest assured I shall bring that to your attention. A few people pointing out that every hour has been Mystery Hour this week, certainly since yesterday morning at 10 o'clock, and long may it continue. But we'll be solving mysteries of an altogether different hue from 12 o'clock today. Still time to get involved in this conversation about how did the Democrats get it so completely wrong? Lots of good answers so far. Room for lots more. James is in Eccles. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, mate. How are you doing? You okay?
I'm grand. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, just to touch on what you said about podcasts and the realisation of how big they are.
Yeah.
You take a look at the numbers that in America, the top 10, like Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson, Theo Von.
All singing for, I think Candace Owens, the woman you mentioned, Candace, what's her name?
Candace Owens.
I think she's gone a bit further than anyone considers acceptable in recent months, but otherwise they're all singing from very similar hymn sheets, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're drawing huge numbers in. So it's a vital.
And Joe Rogan. Joe, did you mention Joe Rogan?
I did. Yeah,
you did because he's been on a journey. He used to. I was going to play a clip of him yesterday on because he's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. If you wanted a petri dish to examine how someone can go from being pretty close to a Bernie Sanders supporter to being a Donald Trump supporter and kind of Elon Musk's wingman. But yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate the influence, James, that these organs have.
You're absolutely right. I've seen those clips, and the transition's pretty incredible, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, I was going to touch that the Democrats should have put the border bill that the Republicans killed front and centre to show that they are tougher on immigration. And it was Donald Trump saying, "Don't put this bill forward because I'll have nothing to run on if you kill the immigration problem."
God, you're right. Look at that. This is what 10 o'clock yesterday, 3 hours, hour and a half today, 4.5 hours into analysis of it, and you're the first person to mention that Donald Trump scuppered Democrat attempts to do on immigration the things that his voters think they want the government to do.
It was the toughest in decades. All the border agencies approved of it for the powers it gave them, and he was the one who killed it for his own personal election campaign. Which I think Democrats should have put front and centre.
How would they have done that? Because it's an admission of weakness as well. We had this thing we could have done, but they wouldn't let us. It's not quite the same as we're here to fix everything. How would they have done that? How could they have made that a more prominent part of the discourse?
I'd have personally played it off by naming the people, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Lauren Boeberts, the Jim Jordans, who were in Congress, who killed this bill that was Republican-led as well from the Senate, and named them.
It's surreal, isn't it, really?
It absolutely is. But I had another two caveats as well about I wonder how much you think these played. First is a little bit throwaway, but the majority of voters in America are white men.
Yes.
And it's a black female running for president. Do you think that would have had a big effect?
We have touched on this week. The misogyny or the racism or the combination of both, misogynoir. Well, the numbers certainly speak of disproportionate support demographically. I think she hit 92% among black women and lost among white women.
Yeah, it's shocking given everything that she was putting forward in terms of bodily autonomy for women and things like that.
Well, it is to you and it is to me, but it ain't to them.
No.
57% of white voters nationwide versus 41% for Harris. Down one. His share, Trump's share. This is exit poll data. We can't crunch or we don't. There's no way, I don't imagine, of knowing final figures on this sort of thing. But yeah, I do. Well, you heard the Vox Pops. Vox Pops are simultaneously highly engaging and not necessarily massively illustrative of deeper issues, not least because the kind of people that are drawn to the microphone when they see someone wandering through their shopping centre are not necessarily the most sensible people in town. But a lot of people talked about America not being ready for a woman.
Yeah, which again is it kind of says a lot more about that country. But again, is that something that Democrats could have looked at and decided they're not ready for it yet or not? I don't know.
No.
The other thing is, what about the incumbency issue? We've had a global inflation rise in every country, and we've seen like South Africa and the Netherlands and France and the UK switch parties because there's a natural thing to blame whoever's in power for the current price rises, regardless of the details. Do you reckon that played a big issue?
You know it did.
Yeah, I think that.
Have you seen Rob Ford's work?
The Democrats are in, and we've got higher prices in the groceries. Let's just blame whoever's in charge right now, regardless of world economic events.
Have you seen Rob Ford's work on this? The political analyst or academic?
I haven't, no.
No, well, you're on exactly the same page that he's on, and I think his list is even longer of the incumbent effect. Just that inflation is one of those things that pinches people. So when we talk about the economy, what we really mean is personal finance, isn't it? Because GDP might be rocketing, but if you feel that your money is going less far than it did last year, you're going to be unhappy with the people in charge, and therefore you are more likely to vote to get them out. So yeah, I think incumbent effect is huge and possibly more measurable than I'm not ready to have a woman president, because people are less likely to admit that out loud, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The bit I still can't get past, and I'm not trying to today because we dedicated most of yesterday's show to it, is how you close your eyes to that charge list, to that. I mean, there's one we missed off that Hugo Rifkin picks up on in the Times today, that his first wife accused him of rape on court documents. The personal depravity, but maybe. I don't know, maybe we're living in an age where that stuff doesn't land in the way that it would have done previously.
Well, I mean, his charge list, he defrauded his own charity, children's charity.
Yes,
the list is endless from his history, from his past.
But people don't care. And, wet lefty liberals could perhaps never understand how you could not care about that. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I ever want to. I certainly don't ever want to become the kind of person that doesn't care about it. James, that was brilliant. I look forward to your next call. So two more things. That one of them obvious, one of them less so. The incumbent effect, particularly against the backdrop of inflation. And then, of course, it doesn't matter if inflation is lower than it would be anywhere else in the world, and if growth is higher, I feel poorer. Which is why J.D. Vance made the comments he made about eggs having gone up to $4 a box. Unhappily and unfortunately for him, in front of a big advert advertising eggs being for sale at $2.99 a box. This text says, from H, I think she smiled too much. I don't know. I mean, it's a valid contribution. These are serious. I like people smiling. I don't smile enough. I've got the natural set of my face is quite grumpy and miserable. So I admire smilers. I envy smilers. She's got a lovely smile. I don't know. I've ever seen Trump smile. He doesn't smile, does he? He kind of just, I don't know what's the word, snarls. We love smiling. John's in Wembley. John, what would you like to say?
Following that gentleman you just spoken to.
Yes.
I'm squarely going to put it on the fact that she was a woman. And I qualify that by, if you remember, back in 22.
Yeah.
The Republicans were on course to do quite well in the midterms. They had brought up critical race theory and all this other stuff, and they were banning books and whatever, and they were doing quite well in the polls. Biden was down in the polls to a point, and then suddenly Roe v. Wade was overturned, and everything changed.
It swung back.
Sorry?
It swung back.
Yeah, it swung back. So, but the point, well, what I'm trying to point out is that it was a white male in charge, Biden. And every single election after Roe v. Wade was passed, the Republicans lost.
Until this one.
Until this one.
Because it's a woman.
Because it's a woman.
Or because none of those other elections were being fought by Donald Trump, John.
Yeah, but remember, I think Trump backed four politicians, 12 politicians, and 11 lost in the midterms.
I guess there's two problems here, isn't there? The first is the most obvious, is that very few people are going to come out and say, I couldn't vote for her because she's a woman. And some people who couldn't vote for her because she's a woman may not even realise that the reason why they couldn't vote for her is because she's a woman. But the constituency you're speaking about is probably the one that didn't vote at all.
Probably. I get where you're going, and you are kind of like, but it's just about, because again, when I called up, your colleagues were throwing some curveballs, and they asked me to explain Obama, and I said, well, Obama was a male.
So this is the ethnicity. So the being a man was enough to overcome some objections to the ethnicity. I could go with a black man, but I couldn't go with a woman of colour.
Yeah.
It's got to be part of it, hasn't it? It's got to be part of it. And the nativism that Trump speaks to, that Trump endorses, you know, the obvious sympathies for white supremacism, whether he's just using it in an opportunistic fashion to harvest support from certain quarters, or whether he actually feels that way himself. It has to have a corollary.
It has to, because what did he do with Kamala? The first thing he went was the colour, her colour.
Yeah.
That's the first thing he went
and then
after.
her mental acuity. I mean, not just casting
does all that
doubts
as well.
on saying that what was the exact word? Can you remember? That Joe Biden's mental acuity declined, but Kamala was born that way. And everyone's calling for David Lammy to apologise to him.
No, he won't. He shouldn't. I hope he doesn't. But my third thing is that I'm afraid to say the gullibility of a good percentage of Americans is quite shocking now.
Same here, though, isn't it? I mean, I know Trump's approval ratings.
No, it's bad in America, though.
You think it's worse? Well, they've got more issues, which is why the phone-in that we will come back to again is the phone-in about the differences between the two countries. Because the fundamental differences between the two countries that make it almost impossible for Brits who have no deep knowledge of the country, no experience of living there, to fully get their heads around some of the things that are normal in America. And what looks like gullibility to somebody British observing it might look somewhat different to somebody American living it. I don't know. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I forgot to make a list. And it's November. We should all be making lists now. I should have been jotting down some of this stuff, but goodness me, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? The question of how did they muff it up so badly, the Democrats. Do you want some more of those demographic details from the exit poll? So Harris only won 53% of women voters nationwide. And that, for an awful lot of the analysis running into the election, was supposed to be a very different figure. It was supposed to be a game changer. It was what drove most of the predictions of Harris winning by a much bigger margin than most of the polling allowed. But no, 53 to 45. Trump's share of the female vote went up 3% from 2020, which casts the Roe versus Wade revision, rescinding, in a very strange light, until you remember that, you know, people have priorities of concern. So they might care about abortion. They might care about bodily autonomy for women, but they might care about other things more, like the price of eggs. 57% of all white voters for Trump versus 41% for Harris. He's dropped a little bit there. Harris wins 85% of black voters, but Trump's up 1% from 2020. This is an exit poll. I mean, I guess it's subject to revision and subject to change. But his win, although he trailed Harris on Hispanic voters, the big change, one of the biggest changes is here. 46% of Hispanic voters supporting Trump. That's up 14 on a 2020 exit poll. And that, I think, speaks to a lazy assumption that if you come from recent immigrant stock, you are less likely to feel squeezed by immigration that you consider to be unfair or unregulated or illegal. So it's not a word I like because it dehumanizes, but I guess that's the intention. Amazing how quickly the language of dehumanization gets normalized and creeps into the vocabulary of sensible, outwardly sensible discussion. These are human beings, in the same way that it's human beings that are dying in the Channel. But that idea that because my granddad came here from Mexico, I'm going to be more comfortable with illegal immigration, I think is a big mistake on the part of the Democrats this time around, and explains a large part of that. Well, that and the other thing, of course, is that if you're Hispanic, it doesn't mean that you're less affected by inflation or less affected by prices in shops. Sharon is in Hull to steer us back to why it went so wrong. What do you reckon, Sharon?
Right, first-time caller, absolutely
Welcome.
terrified.
It's only me.
I know. That's why I'm terrified.
Don't be silly. Go on, what have you got?
Right, I think they got it wrong. When Biden came into power, when he won in 2020, my impression was that he was going to be transitional. He would do 2 years, hand over to Harris.
Yeah.
Due to his age, and he was getting on a bit then.
Yeah, he was.
So that Harris would then come in as the incumbent, and she would be known.
Yeah.
And what she's done, she would have been able to make her own policies in the government.
She'd tell you who she
so
was.
She would actually be there. But coming in as she came in, because he wouldn't stand down,
Yeah.
and still being a vice president, she couldn't win. Because if she'd have gone against him and brought in her own policies that may not align to Biden, she'd have been disloyal.
So let's go back to 2020, right? And let's say that the next election will actually be fought just after Biden won.
Yeah.
And we say the next election will actually be fought by Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. What are the worst possible circumstances in which Kamala Harris steps into that role? And you would get pretty blooming close to the circumstances in which it happened, wouldn't you? The worst way it could happen, because if it had happened as you describe, as a calm and planned transition, it would be better than what happened. And if, God forbid, Joe Biden had passed away in office, then Kamala Harris would have been swept into the Oval Office on a tidal wave of national mourning and national support. So to be completely cynical about things, those are your three options. The way it happened, the act of God, or the plan. And of those three options, by far the worst, from the point of view of wanting to beat Donald Trump in an election, would be the way that it happened. Joe Biden stays there until his position becomes untenable, until people like Barack Obama are having to visit his office with the metaphorical glass of scotch and revolver, and that is the only circumstances in which, at almost the last possible moment, she steps up to the plate. You couldn't have scripted it worse, could you?
No, and then she's tied to a government that is overseeing a genocide. And food has gone up according to what people perceive. The cost of living has gone up. And she can't say anything. She can't put a policy down because Boris, God, wrong country. Wrong idiot.
That was Freudian. That was Freudian, wasn't it?
It was, wasn't it? But not wrong. Trump would have had her down as disloyal and not to be trusted.
Yeah, the Gaza question is fascinating to me, because if you were motivated by concern for the Palestinian people, the idea of putting Trump in the White House or helping Trump into the White House is at first glance obscene. And yet it is, I guess, that they allied themselves so closely with Netanyahu's actions in Gaza and latterly Lebanon that they just sort of saw it as a choice between a rock and a hard place. So it delivered only negative to Harris, and it didn't affect Trump at all. Here's a figure that you may find surprising, and you may not, because you may be quite rightly resistant to the conflation of support for Israel with Jewishness, although obviously enormous amounts of effort are put into pretending that criticising Israel involves criticising all Jews or involves anti-Semitism. What percentage of US Jews do you think voted for Harris, Sharon?
I'm going to say probably, I would imagine quite low, but quite high amongst younger Jews.
No, 79%. So I mentioned that.
I'm not surprised because obviously I've seen them protesting, and there's a lot of Jews that are speaking out, but it tended to be more younger, sort of my daughter's age group rather than my age group. Yeah,
maybe. I just think it highlights how nuanced the role that Gaza played in the American election would be. So Trump very widely perceived as being great news for Benjamin Netanyahu. 79% of American Jews, because being Jewish doesn't mean you're a Likud supporter or comfortable with what's gone on in Gaza, are, according to this exit poll, are believed to have voted for Kamala Harris. Thank you, Sharon. Is that right? There was nothing to be nervous about, was there?
Yes, there was. I'm still shaking.
Well,
I'm going to have a cup of tea now.
Have a nice cup of tea. And next time it'll get easier. Barbara's in Havant. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Oh, well, good morning.
Hello,
well, I woke up yesterday, and when I saw the news,
you went back to bed, didn't you?
I thought, right, that's it. I'm staying under the duvet for the duration.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking about it, and from what I've read, and this has definitely made me feel better, because I thought, oh my God, are there really so many hard-hearted people lacking in empathy in the States, and that was really depressing. But then I'm looking at stuff and hearing you and hearing other commentators, I started to think, it's about the economy, stupid. And then I read this, and it put it in a nutshell. Somewhere, I can't remember where, but I think it was a swing state. A guy said, I've always voted Democrat, but 5 years ago, eggs, I could get 12 eggs for $1. I now have to pay $5.
Yeah.
Well, that really is going to quite reasonably, perhaps unfortunately, override any other consideration for most people, because most people have to pay the rent, the shoes, the kids' shoes.
And that becomes the incumbent factor, because there's no guarantee Trump's going to bring down.
Rightly or wrongly, they will blame the incumbent, that's fair enough in a sense.
I've been on a very similar journey to you, with the added dimension that it makes my job, I want to use a slightly better word, but the bigger the news, the more enjoyable my job is. So I once again find myself in that very weird position of greeting the news in exactly the same way that you greeted it, but relishing the opportunity to talk about it for hours every day with people like you. But the nose-holding element is we should touch on at least. And I wonder whether there's a bit of, well, that's not really my concern. And if, I've read all this stuff, or I'm aware of it, and I know he keeps talking about it. I don't think that the last election was stolen from him, but that's not really my business. That's not really my concern. Even and up to including the sexual offending and the rest of it, that's not, they wouldn't let him be president if he was as bad as some. Yeah, you're just not thinking about it rather than being comfortable with it or approving of it.
Yes, you can. We so easily normalise it, and it becomes like, oh well, but I do need to pay the rent. I do need to pay for the groceries, etc.
We can't derive too much comfort from that, though, can we? Because that is how that's Hitler came to power, by promising to.
I know.
Bring down prices.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing is that if they are hoping for inflation to come down, there's a very great worry about tariffs, because tariffs will be inflationary without a doubt, I would have thought.
You've been listening to those experts, Barbara. When will you learn?
I know, I shouldn't. It's bad for the
When will you learn? Well, there's another example of the hypocrisy, which again I find simultaneously arresting and fascinating. So, Trump is a champion of all the people that bleat on about free markets, and yet he's in favour of tariffs, which are the mothership of anti-free market policy making, just as a lot of people on the trans issues claim that they're motivated by their belief in women's rights to support Donald Trump, even as they give him a green light for being an adjudicated rapist, and of course being accused of rape by one of his former wives in actual court documents. So where does and the abortion stuff, so where does the women's rights fit into that? It's almost as if the very simple question of personal finance, the price of eggs, petrol at the pump, is the Rosetta Stone that unlocks a lot of it. The problem for the Liberal is to embrace that conclusion too warmly, because it's so infinitely preferable to the alternatives. Mystery Hour next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Oh, is that the time already? 3 minutes after 12. And Mystery Hour is upon us, your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. I guess the short way of describing it is that some people ring in with questions and then other people ring in with answers. And somewhere in between the two, the magic occurs. So much magic, in fact, is the guarantee that you will have one laugh out loud moment between now and 1 o'clock. We haven't made that guarantee explicit for some time because we've become so quietly confident that it would just happen naturally. But was it last week? It was such a funny show. I mean, truly, one of those moments of radio that you could not script or you couldn't manufacture in a million years. So I'm making that promise again. You will laugh out loud once, at least, between now and 1 o'clock. There is also a prize, as if that wasn't enough. There's also a prize of a Mystery Hour board game, which is yours if you make my favourite contribution of the week. Find out more about the board game at mysteryhour.co.uk and establish the full terms and conditions for what is, I mean, despite it all sounding so casual, it is a genuine competition. How do I know that? Because the terms and conditions can be found at lbc.co.uk, like what a proper grown-up radio presenter would have with his competitions. I think that's pretty much it. I need to keep a list, didn't I? I mentioned I forgot to keep a list of all the reasons why the Democrats have had such an absolute shooing in the US election. But I mean, you know, that's only politics and the future of the free world. This stuff is serious. This is Mystery Hour. So I will keep a list of all questions and answers. And from that list, shortly before 1 o'clock today, I will select a winner. Shall we crack on? Steve is in Regent's Park. Steve, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on. You got me.
Sorry, got that. Has that happened before?
How has that never happened before? If it happens again, if it happens again, people will be banned for life. Otherwise, every joker in the country will be doing it next time they get on first. Right. But well played. Gotcha. But no, well played. You. Go on then. What's your question?
Are people so colourblind that they just see in black and white?
Why? It's a good question, and I think we've knocked at the door of an answer before, even if we haven't. No, there's nothing wrong with that, mate. I've been doing this so long now. There's absolutely no chance of not having some repeats. But why are people who don't have colour blindness so fascinated by colour blindness?
I don't know.
I don't know
either. A massive list of questions, and that one's at the top.
It's a weird one, though, because it pops up a surprising amount, much more disproportionately, and always obviously from people who don't have the condition. We just find it...
Yeah, I'm looking at some trees now and a purple building and thinking...
What would I see?
Some people literally just see in monochrome.
Is it? I think it's to do with childhood, isn't it? It's because it's one of the things that when we were kids we really couldn't quite get our heads around, and it never quite goes away.
Yeah, maybe.
You get told about it when you're a child. And
I've never met anyone who's told me they're colourblind.
I have, but I can't remember who it was. It was someone I knew quite well, actually. So is it like watching the snooker on a black and white television?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
or is there something that... Well, I'd be amazed if I don't get you an answer to that question, Steve. Thank you. A nice one. Well played. That shows what happens, doesn't it, when you're acting on almost autopilot for the first call of the week. Gregor is in... Is it Kilburney, Gregor?
Kilburney, yes.
Kilburney. Question or answer, Gregor?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
The dial-up internet, that noise. I would like to know what the noise actually is, what you're listening to when you hear the noise.
We don't still do it, do you?
Sometimes for nostalgia's sake.
Is it still a thing you can do? I had it. I mean, going back 25 years, I remember how. Is it still a thing?
I actually don't know. That probably would be a better question.
Can you do the noise for people not familiar with it?
Yeah, well, so it begins with a dialing a phone number.
Yeah, I know that bit.
And then it kind of goes, and then there's a really loud static sound. It goes like that.
That's uncanny, actually. Have you ever thought of a career change?
I'm very happy as I am, but thank you.
I wonder what the market is for dial-up internet impersonators. Are you younger than me? I think you're younger than me from your voice.
Yeah, well, so I'm only 29, but it's quite funny because I was chatting to your producer and she didn't know what dial-up was, and this is the first time in my entire life I've actually felt old.
Oh, gosh. Yes. Well, I feel even older, because I am. And I'm wondering whether, because I can't quite remember, your brilliant impersonation notwithstanding, when you played video games when I was a child were on tapes. And the noise that they made, in my memory, was very similar to the noise that dial-up internet used to make. This isn't an answer to the question.
That would have been like an 8-bit sound chip or something like that was creating those noises.
No, not the soundtrack to the game. The noise that the actual program made if you turned up the volume on the tape recorder while it was feeding into your computer. Do you see what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I think that was maybe before my time then.
Yeah, all right. That's what feeling old really feels like, Gregor. It's 9 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What's that all about then? That was a brilliant impersonation of a dial-up internet. If only there was a bigger market for it, Gregor would be a millionaire by tea time. And, I think there are different types of colour blindness, but broadly speaking, what do you see? John's in Maidenhead. John, question or answer?
Question, please.
Carry on, John.
So, bear with me, because
Well, I've been
what
tempted
does a mental
fate there.
breakdown look like?
In what way?
So, if you were going to look at, and I'm going to just invent a scale off the top of my head, but 1 is I put my socks on the wrong feet and I'm sad.
Oh, Lord.
To monster raving, like mental break, everything's gone, the person can't see straight, they think the wolves are coming to eat them.
Yeah.
I
think you're describing psychosis, are you?
But I think just mental breakdown is the phrase I've got stuck in my head, and I'm just wondering where on that scale is it? What does it look like? Do your brain waves change? Does your biology change? Do your pheromones change? Like, how do you know the difference? And in my head, I'm very conscious of neurotypical, neurodiverse differences. So I'm wondering what does it look like? Is it different? Or does a human just have a break?
Can I ask you a question, which may be entirely inappropriate?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
You don't want to know the answer.
Okay. No, I thought I might be able to suspect what the answer was. So, and that's why I want to answer, just clarify the question quite sensitively. Are we talking about a kind of MRI scan? What would that show if you were close to the edge?
Well, I'm always looking for objective proof, so I imagine it would have to be something like that. But if there's a way to quantify it in kind of language, literary poetry type stuff, like what does that really look like? But for me, I'm looking for an object fact. What does it look like?
Well, are we also wondering at what point a diagnostician would section somebody? Is that going to be part of the answer potentially to the question?
That might be part of the answer, yeah. Because I mean, again, there's a scary hidden fact that isn't talked about during COVID. That I think they took it from 2 doctors down to 1, and as far as I'm aware, it has never gone back to 2.
Okay.
So.
I don't know. I want you to prepare you for disappointment, if I can, John. I don't know that it's going to be possible to get the kind of clarity that you're looking for, but I'm certainly going to try on your behalf and everybody else's behalf as well.
Much appreciated.
It's a fascinating question, but you promise me you take care of yourself as well, all right?
All good. Can I have a sandwich in a minute?
Oh, well, there you go. Everything good starts with a sandwich. God bless, John. It's 11 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What is the kind of diagnostic threshold for a mental breakdown? It's a great question in many ways, albeit obviously quite a troubling one. Dial-up internet, what's that all about? The noise, not the practice. And colour blindness. What do you see? Wayne is in Torremolinos. Wayne, question or answer?
No, it's actually Frank.
Frank is in Torremolinos. Who's Wayne then?
Don't know.
Do you know anyone called Wayne?
No, not personally.
Say Wayne.
Wayne.
Doesn't sound like Frank, does it? It's not your accent.
Francisco is my full name.
Francisco.
And yeah.
Okay. Why have we called him Wayne? Wayne Frank. Wayne Frank. I'm confused now. It's Frank in Torremolinos.
Yeah.
Question?
Might be my Spanish Cockney accent. Anyway, it's a question.
Carry on, Frank.
I've been trying to ring in a few times.
Yeah.
It's carbon dioxide is heavier than air. There was an experiment we used to do at school with a candle in a container, and as the oxygen got burnt up and filled the container full of CO2, it would slowly rise up from the bottom and put out the candle when it reached the level of the candle. So, talking generally, I'm here sitting at ground level.
Yeah.
Why isn't the CO2 slowly falling out the air? Or it might be, but not enough to suffocate me. But why doesn't the CO2 fall out the air to ground level and suffocate us all?
It's a good question. I'm at my weakest on science, Frank.
Yeah.
I'm not proud
I
of it. Okay, all right, mate.
This is my favourite programme.
Oh, thank you.
I'm in tears now.
I feel bad now.
I finally got through.
Oh, Frank, bless you. That's such a lovely thing to say. And that means the pressure is really on to get you an answer. But I think that what you're describing is CO2 is heavier than all the other components of air.
That's right.
But when it is part of air, it is part of air.
Yeah, but in that experiment that I remember from school...
but that wasn't air. They turned air...
it was there.
No, to start with it was, but they took all the oxygen out of the air.
No, it's just an open container. You put a candle in it, and the CO2 slowly fills the bottom of a container. When it reaches the level of the candle goes out because there's no more oxygen. I'm sitting there in a little valley.
Yeah,
the CO2
wondering how you can breathe.
Yeah.
So don't light any candles. Frank, don't light any candles.
Don't light any candles.
Don't light any candles, whatever you do.
Yeah.
All right.
4 candles.
But yeah, 4 candles. I knew one of us was going to say that, weren't we? But I think I understand the question. Why doesn't all the CO2 sink to the bottom of the air?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know.
To ground level.
I thought I knew,
Yeah.
but as soon as I started trying to explain it, I realised that I didn't know, Frank.
Yeah.
There we go.
I so resisted looking it up when I.
Well, you still might have to, mate. I'm not making any promises. But
I'm talking about 3 or 4 months ago. I've rung up a few times. I don't think I've explained myself very well.
Well, you have
the
now.
lady today, she put some effort into it, and she was looking up all the elements. She was quoting me all these real elements.
She didn't put that much effort into it. She called you Wayne.
Yeah. Wayne.
So, Frank, you'll always be Frank to me, Frank. Thanks. There was a question about you last week, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Did you hear it?
Yeah. Yeah, I did listen last week, and you said it was so funny. But I'm going to have to listen to it again now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Stick it on your list. Thank you, Frank, and you take care. Why does this, given that CO2 is heavier than the other components of air, and when you do an experiment with a candle, it sees the CO2 coalesce at the bottom of the bowl, why does the same thing not happen in a valley? It's a good question. Yeah, it's 12:16, and there are 4 questions on the board now, so it's time for you to start answering them.
James O'Brien on LBC.
80 minutes after 12. I finally know a blooming answer, but I can't remember the phone number. So you've texted that to 84850. You haven't WhatsApped it, because if you'd WhatsApped it, you'd know the phone number, because the phone number for the WhatsApp, or rather the number for the WhatsApp, is the same as the number for the show. And of course, if you don't give out the phone number, you don't get any calls. So 0345 6060 973. Or you get the same 3 people ringing every day. So it's always important to give out the phone number. 90 minutes after 12 is the time. I bet you didn't know the answer after all when you ring in and we find out. It's just ruined your day. Alex is in Boreham Wood. Alex, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, Alex.
Yeah, I was just wondering, why are there so many Turkish barbers? Like, why are so many barbers Turkish as opposed to any other country?
Are they actually Turk? I mean, the barber's shop is advertised as a Turkish barber's, which presumably has something to do with the mode of barbering. But are the chaps inside them and chapesses inside them usually Turkish?
I think there's quite a lot. I mean, I live just outside of London.
Yes.
And I think in North and East London, a lot of barbers seem to be Turkish as opposed to it being a style of
We've got 2 or possibly 3 in Brentford alone. And when we moved there 3 years ago, we didn't have any.
I'm just baffled because I've never heard of, I don't know, Greek barbers or Bosnian barbers.
Oh, I know. There used to
French
be quite a
barbers.
lot of Cypriot barbers around, actually. Greek Cypriot barbers or Cypriot barbers.
Oh, maybe that's also linked with the Turkish.
So what is it
North
about
Cyprus,
that corner of the world that produces so much? I think, oddly, I've got a very inappropriate joke. I don't know if I can do it on the radio. I've done it before.
Go on.
Well, I'll tell you what the question is, and I'm not going to tell you what the punchline is, all right? Because I think the punchline, I don't know, I'm being hypersensitive these days. I don't know why. It's why do so many Greek men grow moustaches? So, and I'll decide. I'll take advisement from Ofcom on whether or not I can deliver the punchline to that joke. I saw it written on a wall in a toilet at Athens Airport. Would you believe? So, it's got great provenance, this joke. But I think that the facility for facial hair in Mediterranean countries predates ours. So you often hear racists, or I did hear racists before the last election, pretending that or claiming that all the Turkish barbers were evidence of people smuggling, or completely overlooking the fact that the likelihood of your mate having a beard in 2024 is approximately 100 times higher than the likelihood of your mate having a beard in 1994. So there are just loads more men with facial hair.
Yeah, it does sound a bit like a Daily Star sort of headline.
Or a Daily Mail, probably. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
or a UKIP policy. But the but the question of why so many of the barber shops that have sprung up across the country, there's two in Kidderminster. Why they are all Turkish, I do not know. Except for that little theory that the Turks have been dealing with luxuriant facial furniture long before it became fashionable for every bloke in Britain to have a tash or a beard. Oh, you're on. I like it.
That makes sense.
And the stuff with the ears as well. Last time I went to a Turkish barber, they did the thing with the ears and the candles.
Oh, well, is that where they put all the pins in to remove the wax?
No, they just put a bit of fire in there and then ripped it out again or something. I wasn't really paying attention. He didn't tell me he was going to do it, and I had a hot towel over my head at the time. But anyway, that was a Turkish barber or Turkish barbing. What's the noun for barber? Barb? I sound like Jim Royal now. Told you you'd have a laugh this hour. Mike's in Finchley. Mike, question or answer?
Oh, I've got an answer for you, James.
Carry on,
if I can I just say thank you for keeping me sane adjacent for the past 8 years, mate. I really appreciate it.
I've got to. There's a problem with that. So what I'll do, allow me to bank the compliment and thank you in return. But it ties in with John's question. How do I know you're sane?
Well, I'm just about to answer your modem question, so I'm probably not.
Yeah, well, you've got to have your feet on the ground at least to do that. Carry on, Mike.
No worries. So modem is an abbreviation of modulator demodulator. Now, if you think about your phone line, it's analog, or it would have been back in the day, which means it can only carry wave sounds. A computer is digital, so you need a thing that converts digital signals into analog signals and converts them back. So the speaker on one end of one modem plays a sound to the other one. It receives it on its microphone and then transfers that into digital language. And it's performing a handshake effectively. So they negotiate, and all that noise you can hear is negotiation going, oh, hello, I'm one of these, and I speak this language, and I run at this speed. And the other one then says, yeah, okay, great. And then it goes quiet, and it moves to a thing called to a command language where it then starts sending the data backwards and forwards.
So that's what it is.
Yeah.
Why does it sound like what it sounds like?
Because you've got potentially different devices at different ends. So to establish compatibility, the noise the sounds are used that can be easily converted back to digital signals.
So like a barcode, but sound.
Exactly.
Well done.
There we go.
Qualifications.
40-year IT geek, run an IT department, really need to go out and meet girls and make friends, really.
No, you don't. You're keeping a country afloat, Michael, and we thank you for it. Do you know what the noun is for what a barber does?
No, that's far too complicated.
Barbarism?
Give me machines.
Exactly that. Exactly. Have a round of applause on me. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
And thank you for the lovely words. They do matter, actually. They really do, especially at times of political turmoil, such as this one. 24 minutes after 12 is the time. John's in Billericay. John, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on, John. Hello.
Do you think there's a set of keys or a lock for number 10 Downing Street?
Do you know the answer to this?
No, how would I know?
Well, I don't know. It's just the way you asked the question. It was like it was a riddle, or it was like you got it out of a Christmas cracker or something like that.
No, look, we all watch it every night on the TV, absolutely fascinated by all the comings and goings.
Cummings,
once
Cummings.
they move out,
then what would happen?
Surely, once Boris moved out, would you change the bloody lot? Sorry, the lot.
Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? Here's what I think, and I don't know, and I've never been, and it's highly unlikely that I ever will. I don't approve of journalists fraternising with politicians, even if they're politicians that you believe the best of. But it's a lonely furrow that I plough as a presenter on this radio station by holding that opinion. But I think there's deadbolts on the inside.
Well, there's got to be some kind of security, but
you can't open it from the outside. You can't open it from the outside, which is why David Cameron had to whistle after resigning. Do you remember when he was making his way back in to Downing Street after resigning, and he had to make a noise he said he had to make a noise to alert the security on the other side of the door that he wanted to come through it. So there's no, I mean, he could have knocked, couldn't he? But that would have probably looked even weirder. So you can't open it from the outside.
Yeah.
And then there's always going to be a copper. There's always going to be a copper on the inside, I imagine, don't you, for security reasons?
And one on the outside as well.
Usually, yeah, unless he's on the stump giving a speech. It's made of steel, I think. Callum is on fire today. But that's not an answer. So, I mean, really, all we want to know is whether or not you can lock it from the inside, because you can't do it from the outside, and which means that if you can do it from the inside, it's either going to be some electronic magnetic confection. Yeah. Which you would be able to do from the outside, or it's going to be deadbolts, like you just slide a bolt along. Can you lock the door of Downing Street, is the question. Isn't it?
Yeah. That's the one.
Nice one. I don't know. Carry on, John. Lovely stuff. What do you? No, thank you. I love that question. It's a bit like those sort of. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, where they cross over into lots of different. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I never thought. I knew that bit, but I didn't know that bit. That's why we love Mystery Hour. Well, this is uncanny. You wait years for one call from a well-established Spanish holiday resort, and then two come along at once. Michael is in Benidorm. Michael, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on, Michael.
So I was watching some ants as I was sitting in my deck chair the other day.
All right, mate, don't rub it in.
And I happened to notice that going uphill and going downhill, and when they had something like a leaf or something like that, they was always moving at the same speed. So I want to know, do ants always move at the same speed?
How did you establish that they were moving at the same speed?
To my eye, which I guarantee you is as sharp as anyone else's.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
They all looked like they were doing the same speed.
Have you done any experiments?
I did consider getting a stopwatch out.
No, I was thinking more of getting, like, I don't know, a match or something and trying to frighten the ants to see if they speed it up a bit.
That's a good idea. I didn't try that. And my days of putting a magnifying glass to them obviously are long behind.
I'm very glad to hear that, Michael.
Yeah.
So do ants, are they fixed gear, is what we're asking?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. But that's when downhill, uphill, and when they're carrying a load.
But so up, down, and when they were up, they were up. When they were down, they were down. When they were neither halfway up, they were neither up nor down. But they were all going at the same speed, we think.
Exactly.
I love it.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a joke here. I can't spot it. Something to do with ant and deck. So you were in your deck chair watching the ants. Someone, yeah, but it's not. It's the same as the last fellow, and it was a joke about Cummings and Goings and Dominic Cummings going, but I couldn't quite. I've been doing this job too long, Michael. That's what it is. Honestly,
you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job.
You're very kind. And enjoy Benidorm. I might introduce you to Frank in Torremolinos next week. The question is simple: do ants always go at the same speed? Or tell us something interesting about ants, because it may well be that if they're scared, they'll speed up. But Michael's observations are actually correct, because they are such communal creatures. They move as one, don't they? So often that they do actually have some sort of genetic instruction to move at the same speed, to follow, because they go in a line as well. You can't go at a different speed if you're going in a line. Go bump into the fella in front, won't you? That's science, that is, Keith. You're listening to Mystery Hour with James O'Brien on LBC. The time is approaching 12:30, and Lucinda Horsley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:32 is the time. What do you see if you are colourblind? What is the sort of diagnostic threshold for a nervous breakdown? Why does carbon dioxide not coalesce at the bottom of a dip topographically in the same way that it does if you stick a candle in a bowl and light it. That was Frank's question based on, I think, experiments that he did at school. Why are there so many Turkish barbers? There's been a huge proliferation in barbers recently, which I think is simply due to the amount of us that have facial hair compared to previous generations. But why so many Turkish barbers? If indeed they are Turkish, a few of you telling me that round your way, the Turkish barbers are all Palestinian or Syrian. Keys, what was John's question about? Keys and Downing Street. Can you lock number 10 Downing Street? Does it have any keys or locks? And do ants always go at the same speed? This is a lovely collection of questions. Every time, it doesn't happen often, but every sort of few years or so, there's a little bit of me that begins to wonder whether perhaps Mystery Hour has run its course. So I know. Wash your mouth out with soap and water. And then we just hit a long run of magnificence. And that's what we're on at the moment. We're in the middle of a long run, what I hope will be an even longer run of magnificence. Talking of barbers, I'm thinking of I am going to do Movember this year. I am going to see, partly because of Rivals. I don't know if you've watched Rivals, but there is some fantastic tash action going on Rivals. Notably, Aidan Turner and David Tennant. But I've never really done a tash. I've had facial hair. The only time I've ever had a tash is to make the children laugh, when I'd shave off everything and just leave the moustache there. But I think moustaches are looking quite cool. And Movember, of course, gives you the perfect cover to experiment with a moustache. Here's the problem. I'm not name dropping, but I've got to go round to Paloma Faith's tomorrow to record something. And should I shave the rest of my face and leave the tash before I go and run the risk of looking like an idiot on the thing that we're doing? Or should I wait until I've gone and look a bit scruffy, because I'm just in need of a trim, and look scruffy but not run the risk of looking like an idiot? Actually, you're right. That was just totally an excuse to name drop. 12:35 is the time. Andy is in Cheam. Andy, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, Andrew.
The CO2 question, yes. From Frank, I think it was.
Yes, carry on. Why doesn't carbon dioxide, given that it's heavier than all the other components of air, why doesn't it sink to the bottom of any air-filled space?
So there's two basic reasons. One is microscopic and the other one is macroscopic. So microscopically, there's not much of a difference in weight between carbon dioxide molecules, oxygen molecules and nitrogen molecules, and they're all travelling about 1 or 2 miles a second, but they don't get very far because they hit each other. So they're in a constant state of microscopic turbulence. So it makes them very...
Aren't we all, Andy, eh?
I'm in a case of macroscopic turbulence.
We'll get you.
But then there's a phrase you don't hear very often, isn't it? But one of the main reasons is the microscopic. So basically, at a microscopic level, everything's bashing around, hitting each other. So there's no opportunity for anything to really settle.
Got it.
But at macroscopic level, is even worse effects like wind, convective currents.
Okay.
So at a macroscopic level, the atmosphere is moving all over the place. So basically, it's not still enough for these. So
if you imagine that whatever space Frank's thinking about as a tin can, the tin can is constantly being shaken, so there's no way anything can ever settle at the bottom of it. And that's the sort of molecular reality. What about if it was freezing?
It's good. I was saying to your producer...
Don't give it away. That sounded really clever for a minute.
If it was very, very, very cold...
What, like, say, minus 200 degrees?
Something like that, you might see an effect.
But not a lot.
But not a lot. The example I gave was if you very carefully float some cream on a cup of coffee...
Yes,
and it will stay there because it's lighter. But if you get a spoon and give it a good old thrashing,
that's it.
It all mixes up, and it never.
And it's not coming back.
To the top.
Indeed, it doesn't. I like it. I love it. That's a great answer. Qualifications?
PhD in physics.
Yeah, that'll do, won't it? Round of applause for you.
Thank you very much.
Do you care about? Do you need any advice on how to ensure that you get a nice creamy top on your Irish coffee, or are you comfortable in that space?
Well, you better ask my sister about that. She's an expert. She did hotel and catering.
I got taught how to do it. I got taught how to do it at the brasserie in Kidderminster. So I'll save that lesson for another day, Andy, because your sister probably knows more about it than I do. Gordon is in Burton-on-Trent. Gordon, question or answer?
Hi, this is an answer.
Carry on, Gordon.
Right, it was about colourblindness.
Yes.
I'm colourblind myself.
Okay.
If some people do see things in black and white, and that's monochromatic vision.
Yes.
I don't suffer from that, but I just have regular, common garden colour blindness and have a sort of red-green deficiency. So I don't see things just in black and white. I do see colours. Yesterday I was driving on the road, and my wife said, I said to my wife, "Oh, look at those lovely red hedgerows."
Yes.
And they were green.
Surely you've got used to it by now, Gordon.
Well, life is full of surprises.
You can say that again. So what? So you just have a different palate from the rest of us. And it's the brain anyway. So who's to say you might be
green? It can be other colours. If I drop something on the carpet, if it's a similar sort of depth of colour, I guess, I can lose it entirely, and I'm better just feeling for my hands with it.
Okay, got it. And do we know proportionately what percentage might be monochromatic colourblind?
I think it's a very small percentage.
Yeah, I do too, but it does exist.
It does exist, and I think it exists in men and women. Regular colourblindness tends to be more male than female.
And qualifications are pretty obvious, but I have to ask.
Yeah.
I'm colourblind, so that's fairly clear. Can I ask you a quick question? When did you realise? When did it get established?
It goes back to when I was very little, I tended to draw things in black and white, and my mother was very worried and took me to a doctor who thought I had manic depression.
Oh Lord.
Because I wasn't sure if someone said draw a nice bright, I just picked up the wrong colour.
But when did you so it was subconscious then? You realised that other people were seeing different things from what you were seeing?
Yes, and then when you come to tests in geography, you have to copy something.
That's right.
And I couldn't copy things off the board. I didn't tell anyone.
Ah, I see.
And then I scraped away the pencils. Because it runs in the family, other people in the family had had it.
Okay.
And I scraped away the end of the pencils and wrote the colour on. But that doesn't really help always, because you don't know what colour you're meant to be drawing with.
But it's not a major sort of hindrance to your daily life?
It's not a major hindrance, since, if you bear with me a minute, if you're driving and you see traffic lights, the traffic lights can seem the same colour as street lights running away on the road.
Okay,
Okay, so it's really helped having a white background drawn around the edge of the traffic lights nowadays, which is more the way, which means you can see the order of lights much more easily. They stand out against the street lights. Yeah?
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. And you get a round of applause for it as well, Gordon.
Oh, well, bless you. Thank you very much for having me.
That's lovely.
Okay.
That was lovely. I think you've probably satisfied all of Steve's curiosity with that one, albeit that there are obviously many different varieties of what we call colour blindness. It is 12:41. Guy makes a point. As a guy is a man after my own heart. Where's that message gone from Guy on the Isle of Man? He goes, who is to say that Patrick's red hedge is not it was Gordon, sorry. Who is to say that Gordon's red hedge is not the reality, while what we see is wrong? That's philosophy, that is. Yeah. Ian's in Lee. Ian, question or answer?
Here's a question, please, James.
Carry on.
What I want to know is, if you go profoundly deaf, can you still suffer tinnitus or experience tinnitus?
Tinnitus is like colour blindness. It's something that we're oddly fascinated by, isn't it? Unless you've got a personal investment in this issue.
Which I do, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise. So what have you? You've got tinnitus?
I have tinnitus, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
That's all right. And my hearing is failing as I'm getting older. It comes to us all, unfortunately, James.
So you're thinking that it might be a silver lining of sorts?
Well, it'd be quite the reverse if
you wouldn't want to go deaf, would you? No,
okay. Want to go deaf and still have tinnitus.
No, but so if you have to go deaf, then no longer having tinnitus would be a silver lining of sorts.
Well, of sorts.
So-
I mean, it's
so
not
to
a
speak.
major thing, but it is there.
No, I know.
It's
It's a curious one. So do profoundly deaf people still suffer from tinnitus? It's a great question, Ian. I'm glad I checked. It was that it has a personal kind of dimension for you, because otherwise I may have gone off on some mad tangent which would be helpful to precisely nobody. So let's just get the
very, very unlikely, James.
Thank you, Ian. I feel seen. Let's get that question on the board for Ian. If you are profoundly deaf, can you still suffer from tinnitus? 12:43 is the time. Other questions that still need answers, I'll run through shortly. But there are now phone lines free. So if you can answer any of the questions that we've already got, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I'll run through them quickly now. So we've done the colour blindness, we've done the dial-up, the sort of diagnostic threshold for a nervous breakdown, the proliferation of apparently Turkish barbers. Why Turkish? Can you lock the door of number 10 Downing Street? Do ants always move at the same speed? And can profoundly deaf people suffer from tinnitus? Lauren is in Buntingford. How lovely. Question or answer, Lauren?
It's a question, please, James.
Carry on.
I spend an awful lot of time in my car.
Whoa, is this a motoring question?
No, yes, sort of.
Oh, dear. What's happened here? Can you just bear with me a moment, please, Lauren? I have to have a staff meeting. Hello? Hello? This is a motoring question.
It's more for the interior of the car, really.
Well, there's a claim that it's not a motoring question. So you crack on, Lauren, and I shall decide.
Okay, so
All right.
yes, I spend a lot of time in my car, and I've noticed that when you have the heating on in the car, when you go round a roundabout, not necessarily all the way round, the heating goes cold.
How fast are you going?
Well, I'm quite a fast driver, but I obviously slow down.
So you can
roundabout.
feel the heat coming out of the vent,
Yes,
and as you go round a roundabout,
yeah, it goes cold.
How far round the roundabout do you have to go?
Only halfway. I noticed it this morning again, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to ring up and ask.
Well, there might.
It's not the type of car either, because it happened with my last car.
Did it
Now
really?
It happens with this car. Yeah.
Well, Dan's already texted to say, yes, I experienced this too, and he's put 7 exclamation marks after it. So excited is he to find a fellow traveller on this front.
Yes.
Is it going to be because the air coming in? I don't know. I've got no idea. I hope we get you an answer now. And you're right. It's not somehow it's not a motoring question. I don't know why, but it's not, is it?
Not technically. I suppose a mechanic may be able to answer.
But it's going to have something to do with something beyond cars.
Yes.
All right, you're on. Why does Lauren get cold air out of her heater when she gets halfway round a roundabout? 0345 6060 973. And it's not just Lauren, it's Dan as well.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Quite a few to get through, so let's try and squeeze in as many answers as we can before 1 o'clock. Ian is in Manchester. Ian, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, mate.
It's about the mental distress, the point in which you can kind of see it.
Right.
And I know the caller was asking about how you could physically see it.
Yes.
And there have been lots of studies on brain scans through MRI scans and stuff like that, where you can see mental distress happening in the brain.
Gosh.
The different parts of the brain light up. And so my area that I work in, I'm a therapist with trauma, and traumatized brains light up very differently to non-traumatized brains. So in a moment of distress, your emotional brain takes over first. It's that kind of keep you safe, fight, flight, freeze mode.
Yes.
And then for people who aren't traumatized, your rational brain would then kick in and go, right, is that the right action? Should I be doing that? But there are actual kind of studies that show that traumatized people's rational part of the brain just shuts down, especially when they're faced with that trauma or flashback.
Yeah, of course.
So the emotional brain just takes over and nothing's there to rein it back in. So I suppose you would be able to see that. I mean, obviously these are in artificial conditions where you're measuring this in a scan because you're having to find a way to trigger that, but that would probably be happening in that moment of distress, say when someone's
So that's what an MRI may show, if that's the right an acronym to use. And then in terms of behaviour, which is obviously going to be a lot more subjective, the diagnostician, the doctor, would take a view on whether or not this person was posing a danger to themselves and to others.
Yeah, so that's when you come into the kind of whole section here, and obviously there are different sections of the Mental Health Act depending on kind of what's going on, but you would basically be assessing what's their current state at, and every time you're sectioning someone or looking to section someone, it's very much on that moment, so you're obviously aware of their history, but it's literally like, what's going on for them right now, what protective factors have they got, what's their ability to rationalise. There's a wide variety of factors, which is why it's kind of subjective to say, here's the criteria for whether someone's sectioned. Obviously, there's guidance and there's doctors, social workers, nurses that all feed into that assessment.
Yeah.
But it is very much one of those things that's decided on the moment. We check with each other. There's a lot of conversations that happen. Say, is it safe? Is it not safe? And usually that's the point of, you can be in mental distress and in the community, you can be depressed, you can be suicidal and be in the community.
Of course.
But it's that safety point of, is it safe for you to be in the community is the point. That's when you would think about sectioning someone.
Thank you, Ian. That's a really sensitive and helpful answer to what was a slightly sort of non-mystery hour style question, but you've really stepped up to the plate in a helpful fashion. So thank you from me, and I'm sure
there's a
helpful
great
from John as well. Go on. Yes,
interested.
absolutely.
It's The Body Keeps the Score. It's really interesting about like the brain and trauma and body and everything. It's absolutely fascinating if anyone's interested.
Yeah, well, people will be. The Body Keeps the Score. John, it feels a bit inadequate, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Thank you. If we're going to go completist this week, if we're going to get a full house, we need answers to the Turkish barber question and the keys to Downing Street question. I think we're all right on the others. So come on, skates on, please. Robbie's in Dorking. Robbie, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on, Robbie.
It's to the profoundly deaf and tinnitus question that was proposed. Basically, tinnitus is actually within the brain, sort of specifically in the auditory cortex, as opposed to where deafness is in the, the cochlear part. So deafness and tinnitus is linked together.
Oh.
So where you're listening to that ringing sound is in the sort of the brain auditory cortex of it, rather than where it's in the cochlear. If that makes sense.
So people with profound deafness will be capable of having tinnitus.
Yeah. I think it's about 80% of people that are profoundly deaf have tinnitus as well.
Gosh, qualifications?
I'm a coder, so both my parents are profoundly deaf, and and my partner is actually deaf as well, and she has tinnitus, and both my parents have tinnitus.
That's pretty definitive, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's quite popular. So that's how I thought. As soon as I heard that question, I was like, that's what we were told of why it sort of occurs.
Fantastic. Round of applause for Robbie.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. 12:53 is the time, and David is in Coventry. David, question or answer?
I have an answer for you, James.
Carry on, David. God, sounds like you're in the room. Why is that? I mean, there's my mystery hour question. Why some phone lines? No, it's not that. It's the clarity. Some phone lines sound like you're down a well. Other phone lines sound like you've literally just appeared. I just turned around to make sure you weren't standing behind me.
It now and it'll just drop
yeah,
off,
that's a very good point. You've been listening to this programme for too long. Go on then. What's your answer?
So the answer to why the cold air happens when you go around the roundabout is not actually that the heating is going cold.
Oh.
The air and the density of the air in the car can't turn or stop as quick as the car does, and it moves forward or sideways, and you feel a slight draft, and it feels like cooler air. And I saw an experiment once.
Shut up.
A chap with a balloon filled with normal air that he'd blown up, that he pinned to the ceiling of the car.
Right.
Then he gets a helium balloon, which he pins to the floor of the car.
What were you watching, man?
Oh, I don't know, late night, obviously. But as with the helium, because it's lighter than air, when he was going forward and he brakes, the balloon with air that was hanging from the ceiling goes forward, and the helium balloon that was pinned to the floor goes backwards.
Well, I never. So the hot air is still there. It's just no longer hitting.
It just moves.
It's no longer hitting Lauren.
Exactly. So if you were, for an example, if you were going along and you braked, the air can't slow down as fast as the car, and the cooler air in the back of the car comes forward as it compresses forward because it can't stop, because of the density of the air.
So if you could somehow colour the warm air, you'd see it bending.
It would just come forward and fill your windscreen, and you wouldn't be able to see where you were going.
And why is she still feeling the puff, as it were? The kind of.
It's a movement of air, so it's a very slight draft, and it alters. If you've got your vent open and it's pushing, suddenly there's pressure against that, and it alters the direction, and therefore takes the warm air away from you, and you feel the cooler air.
Qualifications? I watch some very strange things on television.
I'm an engineer and I have an interest in oddities.
That's a really good one. I don't think it. What do you think? It's not a motoring question, is it? It's about centripetal force or something.
It's centrifugal force of densities and physics.
Yeah, thank you very much.
But the helium balloon fascinates children. Watch this, kids. Will break and the balloon will go backwards.
Well, yeah, but also be careful.
Yeah, try not to get in front of the driver.
Yeah, I mean, there's circumstances in which you probably shouldn't be doing experiments.
Maybe do it on a private
yeah,
site somewhere.
exactly, or in a car park. I don't know. Round of applause, please, for David. Quick, change the subject. It's done on Car SOS, Grant tells me, the balloon car trick, but it wasn't a motoring question, it was a physics sort of centrifugal force question. That is really interesting, actually. Carl's in Fulham. Carl, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Carl. Likewise.
So I'm a bit of a history almanac, and I read this article on the Downing Street door once.
Oh, yes.
And there was 5 facts about it. And the fact that there is no keyhole for the door.
Yeah.
It can only be opened from the inside. There's like a lever, a lock on the inside.
Oh, yeah.
And it was replaced in 1991 or 92 after the IRA bomb attack.
Yeah.
And they actually put in a metal door, and they took the old door off. The old door is now in the Churchill War Museum, just about a block away. And basically...
That's 4.
Sorry?
That's 4. You said you had 5 interesting things about it.
The fifth one was basically, it was painted green during Asquith's time in 1908.
Well done.
Yeah.
So,
and it was painted back black by Lloyd George.
Can you lock it, though?
You can lock it from the inside.
No, you can close. Can you lock it? Like close. Well, so it's locked automatically. When it's shut, it's locked from the outside point of view.
You can't open it from the outside.
So it's locked.
There's no keyhole.
So it's locked.
There's no keyhole. It's locked. Yeah.
This is philosophy as well, isn't it? I mean, is it locked? If you can open it from the inside without using a key or anything.
I think the only way you'll get in is if you get in from the back door, hop over the wall.
I like this. Qualifications, read it in a thing.
I read it in an article. I'm a history anarch, so yeah, I like all these kind of things. And by the way, one more thing, the knocker itself is a false knocker. It used to be an iron knocker.
A false knocker?
A brass knocker.
A what knocker?
On the door.
A brass knocker?
On the door.
Well, that's why David Cameron couldn't knock on the door. He had to go hum-ba-dum,
exactly, yeah, it's a false one. It's actually a brass one, and it was painted black.
Well, there you go. Round of applause for Carl.
And one more thing.
What?
The letterbox doesn't open either.
What?
The letterbox on it doesn't open.
Well, it wouldn't, would it? It'd be a security risk. You'd have people putting all sorts of rubbish through them. We're out of time, so we didn't get onto the Turkish barbers one, but we got almost all of it. I'm minded to send... Frank got quite emotional, didn't he? After we'd established that his name wasn't Wayne. I'm going to... we can't get it. He's overseas. Is he on holiday in Torremolinos? Can we establish whether he's on holiday in Torremolinos or not? Okay. Well, then it's going to go to Frank, who is not in Torremolinos. All right? Because as the terms and conditions tell you, I can't be sending mystery hour ball games to foreign countries. It's against the rules, it is. It's against the terms and conditions. That's it from me for another day. We'll do it all again tomorrow from 10. If you missed any of today's show, you can watch it again or listen back even on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James. At 3, I want to talk about adopted children and some changes being brought in, or recommended, I should say. They're likely to be allowed much closer contact with their birth families in future as part of these changes. Is this the way to go? At 2, does Labour have 4.5 years now to show voters here in the UK why a populist turn to the right a la Donald Trump isn't for them? Biden and Harris failed to do it. Can Keir Starmer buck that trend, I wonder? Let's talk about that at 2. But we'll start with that meeting in Budapest of European leaders. Poland's Donald Tusk, another Donald, says Europe must become more self-sufficient. He's talking about defence. Should the UK beef up its defence spending?
James O'Brien on LBC.